so glad you guys are here. Thank you for coming. I'm Kristen Shepard. I'm the floodplain manager here at Mile High Flood District. Your instructors are up here. We're going to introduce ourselves. You'll get to know us. We're going to talk a little bit about where stream management came from, why we do it. Then we'll do something to get to know you, and then we'll dive into the content. Okay? So to get started, can you click me in the PowerPoint, Laura? We're gonna have a lot of technical stuff today, and it's gonna be great. This room is amazing, but there's a lot of like stuff going on. Also, just want to say hi to all the people online. There's about 100 and almost 200 people online, so people joining in from all over. Thanks for being here. Yeah, so welcome. We just want to get to know a little bit about our instructors today. Mary Powell is the environmental manager here at Mile High Flood District. Her son is having an oral surgery problem right this second. So send some good thoughts her way. She should be here later. But I think of Mary as the green architect, the mastermind of VEG. She's able to see the whole picture and make on the ground progress. So she sees, thinks about, and moves forward with the forest and the trees. It's a real special gift. This is Troy Thompson. He's here. I know it doesn't look like his picture. He's the ecological resource consultant, president and senior water resource engineer. We scoured the internet for a professional photo of Troy, but we could only find him in his natural habitat. So he's our geomorphology guru, and much like soils and geomorphology itself, I find Troy to be very steady, consistent, and reliable, a true rock and a genuine human being. You guys didn't know I was going to say nice things about you, but I'm saying nice things about you. Jesse Clark is with Stream Landscape Architecture and Planning. I don't know if you say and, but it's plus planning. He's a principal landscape architect. Jesse is here for our community values and collaboration, really talking about what are we missing from the community values, the collaboration perspective. His special sauce is to think of things in a totally new way, explore the boundaries, and then push them a little bit. And he'll make you think about things totally differently. So it's really good. He flips things upside down so you can look at them in a new perspective. Brian Taylor's with Moeller Engineering Company, project manager. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. We were doing this on the last minute. Ryan is the keeper of flows and shaper of currents, our H&H expert. He is no pressure. He's an exceptional chef and is really good at bringing all the ingredients together, both with food and with projects, into something delicious and complimentary. And last is Brent with Valerian, an associate principal planner, who is the weaver of systems. I've got real flowery with yours.
Awesome.
So the weaver of systems and dreams, the voice of people and place. But truly, I find, he speaks for people and place, like in a real meaningful way. And I find Brent to be very clever, deeply human, and above all, just very kind. So these are your instructors are lovely humans here to help. They're subject matter experts. They know a lot about their skills and field of expertise, but also just really great people and here to have a good time with you. Couple of quick things. We have a back of house. Like I said, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of people online, a lot of people in the room. We have three kind of co-facilitators, myself, Laura Hines, and Bao. We're all in the room and online, so kind of moving about, making sure things are working well. If you online folks have any questions or need anything, feel free to pop it in the chat, and Laura and Bao will help take care of you if you're having trouble accessing or can't hear the room. And then Lindsay Franklin, you met her on the way in. She's our logistics person. So you're running late, you missed something, you don't know where the PDF is. I don't know, anything logistical, Lindsay's your gal, okay? Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about, who are we? Right, meaning who are we as Mile High Flood District? So you're in Mile High Flood District offices. I think there's some people online that are all over the place outside of even Colorado. So quick, brief introduction. Mile High Flood District is in the Front Range of Colorado in the Denver metro area. We cover 7 counties, 33 incorporated local governments. We have 3,500 miles of stream, and we do all kinds of things from land development, master planning, research and development, floodplain mapping. We kind of do it all from the dreams of a stream to construction and vegetation and getting it in the ground for people to enjoy. That's us as the district. I was going to talk a little bit now about where Stream Management Academy came from, like why are we even doing this in the first place and how did we get here? Then we'll do some logistics and content. Sound good? Okay. Oh, hey, it worked.
Drop down.
Like a runway? You're
But
missing out.
not go outside these boundaries.
Oh, I don't recognize boundaries. Would you like this? Sure. And just a few logistical things, Kristen. So the PDF of the presentation will be shared with the students
After the class.
after the class. So for all those in person and online, you'll receive a PDF. And in future classes, we'll hope to get this to you ahead of the class. I know a lot of you like to note take in them. So our first class, we're kind of figuring out logistics. So appreciate the grace. We'll get that to you ahead next time. In terms of snacks and breakfast, it's always going to be in the back. Don't hesitate to just get up during the session to go grab something for yourself. Restrooms are out through those door and to your left, and then on your right by the water fountain. Suffering is a choice, as one of my colleagues always say, so please choose to not suffer. And take care of yourself. If you've got a phone call or if you've got to respond to email, we understand you guys are committing a lot of time to us today, so don't hesitate to pick up your things. We've got plenty of space outside this room to take a call or check on email. And for those that are online, can they hear us okay?
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
can they see us okay in our crib? Yes.
Tell them to pin Kristen Shepherd's, if you can.
Oh, right.
Pin on.
Yes, thank you. There, for the folks online, we're sharing the slides right now, but there should be, if you can turn your camera off, there should be a camera on that's my name, Kristen Shepherd, or the Mile High Freight Training Room, one of the two. And you can, I think, right click it and say pop out slides or pop out screen. So you'll have the slides on one side and then you'll see us a little bigger here while people are talking to the class.
And if you have any questions on how to do that, put it in the chat. And Laura Hines is monitoring online and she'll help you walk you through that. And so again, just to repeat, Kristen's going to be our in-person facilitator. We feel it's really important to engage both audiences, the ones that are here, but the ones that are also in our virtual space. And so Kristen's going to keep this group silent, quiet.
Yeah.
Or
In line. I'm gonna keep you
in line. And then Laura Hines and I will pop into that virtual space from time to time to make sure that you're also part of the conversation. So please do put things in the chat as we will be connecting with you often. And Laura, there's probably some sound to this video. If you could turn it off when. Oh, okay, never mind. It's not there,
Oh.
but that's okay.
It should have been.
We
the
don't need it. How many of you grew up around water? And those online, feel free to raise your hand as well. Okay. And I had a video of a prior Stream Management Academy class walking along the banks of river. How many of you have walked the banks of rivers looking from the outside in? How many of you have been in the river chest deep? Wow, you guys are all ahead of me. For those that haven't tried it, it's a worthwhile experience. And the reason it's important is I grew up around water. You know, my family did a lot of farming in California, and water was a way to cool off. You've heard me share the story at symposiums in the past. And so we would jump into Lost Lake to cool off. So I grew around water, but I did it more for recreation. It wasn't until 12 years ago. So I've been in the industry 30 years. 18 years into my career, I finally actually got myself into the infrastructure that I was managing, designing. It was a part of a trip with a colleague of mine on the Yampa River. And for me, it was an eye-opening experience. I went to this field trip thinking this is the first and last time I'm going to get in water. So I'm out there with shoe size 10 waders, which for those that know waders, it's huge. There's a lot of air pockets in my feet and along my legs and in my body, and air pockets and water. Buoyancy is a real thing, especially when you get chest deep. So we hop into the Yampa River. and we're knee, ankle deep, like. We start walking and we're walking along the center of the Yampa River. And then we pop into the outside bend and we're still fairly either knee or ankle deep. And then we walk along the outside of bends. And at that point, water's going into my waders. And trying to take your waders off with water inside and outside is nearly impossible. So you know what happens next. I fall into the water. But being in the river, which I had never done in my life until this point in time, I was taught to look at, to really notice what's below me. And walking on the outside of the bends, I noticed the soil softer and it was mucky in places. And for me, being an engineer, I knew that that meant that, okay, it was maybe slower. Or there was areas where it had an opportunity to deposit. And then I was walking along the center and then the outside of bends, and I noticed those areas being a bit firmer. I was also walking along naturally forming riffles and noticing that, gosh, there's coarse material below me. And that really helped me to understand the behavior of the river floor as it relates to the behavior of rivers overall, that it sorts itself over time. And that was interesting for me. I had not contemplated that. I was also taught to look at the interaction of the river relative to its bank. And my colleague said, give me some observations. And I said, well, in areas where there were grasses, I noticed that there's more scarring on the banks. In other words, the bank won, or the river won. But in cases where there were more woodies along the bank, the water was diverted away and kind of the bank won. And it wasn't a competition, but it helped me to understand, at least start to collect data around the behavior of rivers relative to vegetation and relative to soil. And I noticed soil in areas where there were more grasses. They pointed out those banks were younger because those went through a process of probably erosion and then stabilization or building up again, vegetation growing, and then at some point those banks sloughing off again. And in woodier areas where there were willows or more woodier materials, those banks were older and they were more stout and in place. And that for me was eye-opening. I don't know for those that have stepped into water what that moment was for you. It was eye-opening in the sense that it was the first time in my career, and this is more than halfway through, where I was very insecure. And insecurity because I thought I knew everything, right? And I also thought as a hydraulic engineer, I had control over the systems that I was designing. And for the first time, I realized I don't have control. The second thing was I was very uncomfortable. That insecurity left to uncomfortableness. But out of that uncomfortableness, my mind opened up. I was in the place of, for the first time, I feel like in my career, I was actually open to hearing someone else's perspective and curiosity came out. It wasn't natural. It's just a part of that process of you're uncomfortable, you want to fix it, you go seek the information, and through seeking the information, you get a little bit of information and then you're curious. I was in a state of curiosity, and that state of curiosity opened my door to really learning some things that I didn't realize I needed to learn, because up to that point in my career, I felt like I had learned everything. And so from that Yampa River experience, that one day, I was insecure, I was uncomfortable, and was trying to learn to be comfortable with uncomfortable, which means for most of us in this room, it's like, let's fix it, right? So I need to become an expert. And the term that I had crossed upon at that point was, I had known what vegetation was through friends like Mary Powell, Deb Kemmer, for those of you that have had the opportunity to work with Deb Kemmer, folks like Jess Karp. I had understood what vegetation and the role of vegetation in our world. But the one thing I didn't understand was this new term of geomorphology. And that was the Yampa River was my introduction to it. And it was as explained to me, the interaction between soil, vegetation, water, and the sediment that's laid in that water. I understood what they were saying. I really didn't know what that meant. And I wanted to become an expert at geomorphology, because as engineers, and scientists, as planners, we want to be the subject matter experts of everything. And so I started on this journey of self-educating, working with others. And then it was through my conversations with colleagues, and those colleagues that are instructors today, that made me realize that I don't need to be an expert at all of that. because my role was going to be a project leader, a project manager. And that what I needed was just a basic understanding of those sciences to complement my hydrologic and hydraulic, because I was a subject matter expertise in those two arenas. I didn't need to be an expert in geomorphology. I didn't need to be an expert in vegetation. And lastly, I didn't need to be an expert in people or community values. I just needed to have a basic understanding of those other sciences, which we now call the 5 elements: hydrology, hydraulics, geomorphology, vegetation, and community values. I just needed to have a basic understanding of those other 3 elements so that I could facilitate, I could guide the subject matter experts that were now a part of our team. And that was a big aha moment for me. And it started dipping into the river, on the Yampa River, and really having this aha moment of really, here's what my strengths are. I have a basic understanding of these, and that's enough for me to do what I do. And so that's where the Stream Management Academy came from. It was born from this trip to the Yampa River, and really my insecurity, my uncomfortableness that promoted curiosity. And what that curiosity for me taught me was, up to that point in my career, I had gone into every conversation with a knower mindset. And you'll hear us talk about this a lot in this class, where I go in and if there's a missing answer, I'm seeking an answer. I have got this obsession with answers. And so when you're obsessed with answers, you don't ask a lot of questions. You don't spend a lot of time listening either. And up to that point, I was just seeking answers. I didn't care where the questions came from. By being uncomfortable, by being curious, it led me to really a learner mindset, with the recognition that there's a lot to know, there's a lot to learn, and I do need to just stay in this learner mindset and continue to ask questions. And so through that came this idea of, well, we need a short course that can provide us with a basic understanding of those sciences that isn't a part of our academic training and isn't a part of our life training. And we don't need to be subject matter experts at it. We just need to have a basic understanding and how to integrate it so that we can lead and facilitate conversations with subject matter experts that are going to be designing facilities with those subject matters in mind. And so the whole premise of the Stream Management Academy is to equip all of you and empower you with the basic understanding of the other sciences that might not be your subject matter expert. And some of you are experts in community values. Some of you are experts in hydrology. Some of you are experts in geomorphology, but you're probably not an expert in all of them. And I would say challenge yourself to say that I'm not. And I need to stay open to grab the basic understanding from the courses today. And with that, you'll get the education from the Stream Management Academy. But the hope is that from both those two things, that you're going to be ambassador for the 5 elements. You're going to create space for conversations. You're going to rely on the network that you are creating today amongst yourselves, but also with the 200 graduates that have gone through this program. And so as an ambassador, what we'd love for you to walk away from at the end of this program in October is that you are going to help others to embrace not knowing everything, help others to embrace that just a basic understanding of these other sciences will allow us to kind of lead and manage holistic projects, with the hope that we all as watershed ambassadors can really lead, guide decisions in land planning and land management practices kind of here in our local industry. So the hope today is that you will join your colleagues as watershed ambassadors and kind of gain the value of what we have experienced in the last 9 years of walking away with a basic understanding of these 5 elements and then how to integrate it into kind of your day-to-day. So I just want to welcome all of you. This is intended to be a very informal class, so please do interact with us, interact with the instructors. The class is the best when there's a lot of conversation and you're interrupting us and really sharing, hey, you said something and I'm uncomfortable with it. Please say more, or I disagree with you and here's why. We love that kind of interaction, both in class and online, that is what makes the best class. And so just wanted to share with you kind of how we got here and where we are headed. I don't know, instructors, Kristen, anything you guys wanted to add to that? Because you guys have been a part of this journey from 2016. Anything that you wanted to add in the 9 journey that you've had with the Stream Management Academy?
I mean, I would just echo, it's always best when everybody is jumping into the conversation and more, some people are more comfortable than others, but we very much appreciate the perspective of others. I mean, I think that this curriculum has evolved because people have contributed, in addition to what the instructors are saying. And I feel like every time we debrief on this, we always come away with, we've learned just as much from the class as we think we're imparting.
And I will say, I think that's a great comment, Jess. When we first started this program, we got very detailed and we were teaching formulas and calculations. And we've evolved and we realized that there's a hunger for that, right? Everyone comes to this course going, how do I lay out the geometry of a geomorphic complementary channel? And that's where we started the course, is getting into the actual calculations of it, realizing that actually a lot of us in this room, guess what? Your strength isn't in doing the calculation. Your strength is actually in leading a group of people in thinking similarly and applying these principles, because you can touch more people that way. You can have a larger impact when you're managing a host of projects with a lot of people than just working on one project. And so we have pivoted from detailed calculations to really fundamental principles. And we've found that to be kind of the sweet spot, but we'd love to hear from you at the end of this program, whether that's working or not. And your feedback is very important to what Jess said. You'll see, and we won't have it with this first class, but every class we will send out a feedback survey, because we want to basically take your feedback and make the next class different to address the feedback that you've given us. So we do take feedback very seriously with each class. Okay, and hand it back to you, Kristen.
We talked a little bit about logistics earlier. I don't think there's anything else. We covered most of these. I did want to say we will have a break at 10-ish and lunch. We're going to stop at noon. So here's our agenda for today. And I should have put like in parentheses up there, ish. This is very ishy. So this is the curriculum we're going to cover is laid out here. We'll go into it in a little more detail in a bit, but yeah, break it around 10-ish and then we'll end for lunch for people in person. So before we get started, we do want to, a little bit about us. We want to get to know a little bit about you. We have a little icebreaker activity. What we'd like to do, I'm going to talk to the people. I'm going to explain it here for the in-person folks, and then the online folks have a similar activity, but slightly different because they're online. And then we'll move from there. So for in-person, what I'd like you to do is you'll group up into groups of 3 or 4. So if you're like at this table, you can just turn around and this is a little group, and then back all the way back. When each person is your turn, what you're going to do is you're going to share your name, where you work, and a body of water that you feel connected to, and why. Okay, so you're going to share your name, where you work, a body of water you feel connected to, and why. And the next person is going to repeat your name and the body of water that you feel connected to. It'll help everybody remember names. And then they'll go name, where they work, water, body of water, and why. So you don't have to, the third person doesn't have to remember the first 2, because that could get real interesting. So you just have to remember the person before you. Okay, so to demonstrate, I would, if this was my group, I'm out of the box. Now my group's over there. And I say, my name is Kristen Shepard. I work at Mile High Flood District. A body of water that's really important to me is over here, that is Bear Creek. There's the Bear Creek Park. It's important to me because I spend a lot of time there with my son, and I get to teach him about how rivers work, and we get to play in the water together and learn to ride bikes. And it fosters a sense of community with me and him, but also to the land that we live near. And then Brent would introduce me. Yeah.
This is Kristen Schwartz of the Mile High Flood District. and her favorite body of water is Bear Creek. And I'm Brent Caslon. I work at Valerian, and the body of water that is most memorable for me is the Platte, but not the Platte in Colorado, the Platte in Nebraska.
Why?
Because that's where I grew up, and that's just the body of water that we recreate.
So you see how that's gonna work? So that's what we're gonna do in here. Thank you. For the people online, what you're gonna do is we're gonna pull up a map and we have a poll. It's called Poll EV. There'll be a link and a QR code. And what you can do is you can drop a pin to the body of water that you feel connected to, and you can list the name of that body of water in the group, in the Teams chat. And then once that's done, it'll prompt you for another page, which will ask you why. And you can either have a whole sentence or just a few words of why that body of water, and it's gonna populate a word cloud. So while the in-person folks here I'm gonna release you to chat for a few minutes. We're gonna mute the room so that the people online don't have to listen to us chat. And then they can start populating. So go ahead and find your group and begin getting to know each other's favorite water bodies. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Be sure that we're unmuted. Okay, great. So just wanted to check in really quick and, did anybody find any connection between their body of water and someone else's? Was there any similarities? Yeah? Oh, just yes, okay. What about with this is from the folks online, this is their why, a lot of childhood memories, river. Did anybody have similar whys in the room? Yeah, yeah. When this popped up, it kept populating and then childhood memories just got bigger and bigger. And my son is 6 right now and I was just like, oh my God, we're making those memories. But I think what's great about this exercise and what's great about hearing that whether you're online or in person, it's water that connects us. Water is the thing that can bring us all together and shape the foundation of who we are. And all these things on here are so deeply human. You know, your why you love a place is so deeply human, and being human is what makes us connect. So if you could put the PowerPoint back up, we're going to talk about connection in a bigger kind of meta way with systems. You'll hear a lot about systems throughout this class. The systems are integrated throughout every aspect. The class is it's broken into 3 real distinct classes that have different content. But the way that can you click into it? Thank you. The way that they're broken up is with natural systems, and then class 2 is urbanization, class 3 is about planning. So today we're going to talk a lot about how does the system of the natural world work without people in it? And that's to understand not what we've done wrong or right, but just kind of how the system works without us. The second class, urbanization, is how do you involve people in that system and make tweaks and adjustments so that in the third class, as you look forward and plan, you can create these systems where everybody benefits: humans, plants, water, geomorphology. Okay, so today's class is split. I know. I'm trying to bring you in, Troy. I'm trying to help. So today's class is the 3, like I said, we're going to start with systems thinking. We're going to move into what's called the transect. This is an idea of how urbanization moves. I'm not even going to pretend to talk about, Jesse's going to talk about this later, and he's going to do a great job at it, but it's really about different, yeah, I'm not going to try. Jesse's going to take care of it. And then we're going to get into the 5 elements that Bao mentioned earlier. So understanding those a little bit more in depth. Okay, so let's start off with systems thinking. Brent's going to take us on a magical journey.
I'm gonna try to take this magical journey of systems.
If you like.
Click? I can't. Yeah. Right. So I'm gonna get kind of philosophical a little bit. So, Barry Commoner is a famous ecologist, and he said everything is connected to everything else. Everything must go somewhere. Nature knows best. There's no such thing as a free lunch. If you don't put something in the ecology, it's not there. So the slightest movement of the bird in the front, or any of these fish, or all of these things changes the course of action for everything else, right? So systems thinking is a comprehensive approach that analyzes interconnectedness and interactions within a system. I'm going to just keep reading up my sheet here because, and emphasizing the understanding of the whole rather than focusing on an individual. So, going with my philosophicalness. So Edward Lorenz, he was a meteorologist in the 60s, and he was creating a model for a weather system. And so he added the atmospheric coordinates into the computer, and it created a model. So with the goal of predicting the weather for the next few months. And then out of curiosity, he ran the simulation again, and got a totally different outcome from the first, right? So after a while, the simulation produced these drastically different results. And the question was why? And the first model, he had rounded to 6 decimal points. And this second model, he rounded to 3 decimal points. And that 1/1000th of a difference created this drastically different change, right? So we also, so that's called chaos theory. So the equivalent of rounding to a speck of dust changed drastically, the result of the outcome. In other words, the flapping of a butterfly in Brazil caused a tornado in Oklahoma. So while there's uncertainty, physics still holds true, right? So it just goes to show you that everything affects everything. So when we're talking about the birds in that one slide, one moves, but they all kind of move. But now we're trying not to crash into others. We're avoiding the obstacles, and something comes in and changes the outcome of everything, right? So those birds are all moving in a different way, just based off of one flap of wing of another one. So trying to bring this back to what we're doing, we can look at our projects, in a very linear way. We can have our goal and create a finished product, right? And we get something that looks kind of like this. If we're just looking at one problem with our projects, we can have a solution that, that fixes that problem. But what about those externalities? When we're looking at systems thinking, we're thinking of things that could be beyond what our goals are, or, maybe our goals are a little bit broader in scope. And so we get a project then that can be a little bit more comprehensive in our thought, right? So when we are thinking about all of the elements that we can kind of create a product that is better for everybody, better for the community, and better for the environment. So talking about this again. So while the world is quite literally a bubble, our actions change the ecology of the world. So I talked about Barry Commoner. He came up with 4 laws of ecology. Everything is connected to everything else. We have to make sure that we remember that, right? When we change one thing, it's going to affect something else. Everything must go somewhere. There's no such thing as waste. It's still, if something is wasted, it still has to go somewhere. Nature knows best. If we weren't here, nature would. And lastly, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Exploitation of nature actually carries the cost. And what that cost is it could be anything from dollar value to loss of habitat or anything like that. So Mary's going to talk about the, is that right? You're going to introduce the 5 elements?
Yeah, I'm gonna introduce the 5
Okay.
elements. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing so far? I like to, it's good to see so many of you who I've worked with over time, and it's good to see some faces that I haven't perhaps met, or at least I don't remember that I met you. But so looking forward to spending some time with you guys in person and getting to know you better over the course of the class here. Online folks, continue to let us know if you're having problems hearing or seeing in the chat. Again, we encourage questions. If you have a thought you want to stick into the chat, feel free to do so. And if it's something that Laura thinks rises to the level of shareable, she'll interrupt me. So, yeah, thanks, Brent. I the concepts that Brent brought forward, I don't think everybody's kind of heard the whole butterfly effect. I mean, in their whole movie, right? So, but I think what's interesting is how it applies to the work we do every day, right? And if you kind of come at it with that, holy cow, everything connects to everything, and how am I supposed to deal with this in my daily work, and how's this relevant? it can be a little overwhelming, right? And so we at the district had that overwhelm. Oh, this is all important stuff to us in our projects, in our communities, in our lives. How do we actually put it into a paradigm that makes sense, that we can grapple with in the work that we do at the district, and I think the work that you all do as well. And so we really started thinking about what is it that our work actually affects in a practical fashion. We can't take care of everything. Everything's connected to everything, but in reality, there's only so much we could do. So only so much our projects can do. So what are we actually focused on? How do we know if we're getting a good project? And we came up with what we call the 5 elements of stream function. Folks online, how many of you put a little thumbs up if you've heard of the 5 elements of stream function? Folks here, raise your hand, 5 elements of stream function if you've heard of it before in our symposium or
A lot
anything.
of thumbs up, Mary.
Thumbs up online. Awesome. Thank you, online people. We have a mix here in the room. It's probably similar. So the 5 elements of stream function is a foundational thought process that we've come up with that helps us organize our subject matter experts, helps us organize how we look at projects and their success, and hopefully not failures, but we do have failures. So it's kind of what buttons can we push and move that make a difference in our world. And the first thing we came up with when we were talking about these 5 elements, and we call them the 5 elements of stream function, and then community values is a little different, but we recognized as an organization that we hadn't been spending enough thought on our community members, what the community needs to get out of it. So we added that as a value as opposed to a physical condition. But obviously the community values, what's important to the people living next to the stream, to the local government sponsors of the projects. And it can extend beyond just access to nature. It could be economic development is important along our river corridors. It could be public safety along our river corridors, things along those lines. We also, of course, went to our wheelhouse here at the district, hydrology. Hydraulics, really important parts of stream function. These are the things that we can manipulate with our projects and that we can look at from our various subject matter experts, engineers, and scientists. We have the geomorphology, obviously, and then vegetation. And the vegetation piece, again, I think generally hydrology, hydraulics, to some degree geomorphology was we've been dealing with that pretty well, but I think as an ecologist, biologist, the vegetation piece, of course, it was nice to see that added and recognizing that it's part of our infrastructure as well. So it's kind of a little bit of a different add to that. So these 5 elements are kind of how we organize our thinking when we're looking at projects, and you're going to hear a lot about it. In fact, the course is generally arranged around these 5 elements of stream function. Any questions about that right off the bat? That makes sense? Do we miss anything? Oh, and one thing, some folks bring up, well, what about water quality? That's there are lots of things we didn't include. Water quality, we didn't include wildlife or, biotic plant or animals, wildlife habitat.
Economics, Mary.
Economics. Well,
Yeah.
we could roll that into community values.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
It's part of community values.
It can be, yeah. But there's some things we don't have in there because we didn't feel like it was necessarily something that our projects could really influence on the day-to-day. Like water quality, yes, we have water quality benefits, but it's very difficult to determine if our specific project has had an effect on water quality because we can't control the water coming in. And so it's kind of like, well, we'll do what we know it's a benefit, but we're not going to necessarily use that as a metric of success. Same with wildlife habitat. It's kind of like, well, if you build it, they will come. Hopefully what the conditions that we're creating are beneficial and provide a more diverse ecosystem, but we're not going to count invertebrates because maybe some spill upstream. The fact that they're not present doesn't mean it's because our project sucks. It could just be that they aren't in the system at all. So, any thoughts on that? Oh, all right, we nailed it. Excellent.
Can we, before you go on,
Yeah, yeah.
how many people associate themselves with H&H in here? How many associate themselves with geomorphology? How many associate themselves with vegetation?
Yes.
How many of you associate yourself with people or community values or social? Love it, overlap, nice.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of overlap with those people on. I think we still want, who's the we?
Wow.
H&H.
Excuse me. Well, and actually, to be honest, I love Jesse's questions because we make a very deliberate attempt with selecting the students in this class. You are here because we thought you ought to be here based on what your experience is and your subject matter expertise. We want to have a kind of a mixed up class. And so I'm glad to see that we did have a variety. As always, you need to really push the geomorphology education thing.
Yeah.
There was a comment online, Mary, and I think it's important because I think it's part of it, is what about cost? And let me just make sure that I'm reading this is there any consideration given to the cost of a project?
Sure, you bet. There is consideration given. I would say it's given as, it can be part of the community values piece. What is the cost of the community? What's the value they're getting in return? But I will say that generally the cost aspect of it is a separate consideration. You know, there's lots of other things that go into a project besides just the 5 elements. But we would like to determine, the potential sort of lift that our projects provide, and then look at the cost of that lift. And we can sometimes use that cost analysis when we're looking at, well, alternative A, we can get this amount of lift and it's going to cost X number of dollars. Different alternative, X number of dollars to get this same level of lift. And so there is some consideration of that, but it's not something that we
I'll hit on that.
start with. They'll hit,
I'll hit-
Jesse's going to hit on that. So good question.
We had a,
Oh, go for it, Laura.
we had another comment online specifically about the vegetation pillar. And does the
Sure.
vegetation pillar include soil health and as a core design component?
Sure, you bet. Vegetation and soil go together like, what is it? Anyway, Laverne and Shirley go together. Yes, yeah, the soil health is absolutely part of it. And that can also be part of the geomorphology, soil and just geomorphic characteristics, geological characteristics play together. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward for sure. Yeah. All right, we have an exercise that Kristen is going to run us through.
Yeah, right. So everyone get up and stretch your, no, I'm just kidding. Not really gonna, it is an exercise, but for your mind. Yeah, so this is about systems thinking, and I love that from Brent's slides about everything is connected to everything else. And we gave you the overview of the 5 elements, and there's so much more that goes into every single project. So you can use that 5 elemental lens, or you can expand, that's okay. But what I want everyone to do right now is to think about a project that you are working on right now, and preferably in an urban drainage way or some drainage way of some kind, but it doesn't have to be. So any project that you're working on right now, and take a moment and think about that project as a system, like all the components, everything that's involved in that project. Does it cross parkland? Is it open space? Is there soil or is there concrete? What are the key elements in that project? And then if you had unlimited budget and time, but also in this example, we're going to pretend you have unlimited budget and time. Laura, can you put the poll EV up? I want you to think about like who's missing, which element might be missing, what lens or perspective might be missing from this project. And we're going to put a poll EV up, and in the class as well, you can use your QR code with your phone. You can use a link. They're not seeing it. Thank you. And we just want you to think about who or what might be missing, and we're going to see a word cloud populate for what might be missing from a project you're working on right now. So everyone in the class can use this as well, and people online too. So let,
The response is just which element is missing.
it could be, or it could be more than that. It could be a community official, it could be recreation, it could be, so I'm just just really curious, like what perspectives might be missing from your project?
My screen is here too, but you guys can't zoom in far enough.
I see a lot of recreation, a lot of community.
You do reach a max with the amount of responses, so I'll clear here in a second and we can keep gathering as you guys, if you guys aren't able to get your response in.
A little bit of neighborhood, sustainability. Science. That's a little troublesome, but I get it, I get it. All right, they're gonna clear the responses so people can keep adding.
Yeah, keep adding.
Keep going. What is
Did
there?
you have second thoughts, other stuff?
Yeah, other things you want to add, anything, is vegetation and have a component of your project. Geomorphology, Troy.
Ooh, that's a big one.
Missing the soils component, okay.
Aspiration.
Yeah, some of these are real depressing. No,
Ah,
it's good, we wanted to ask. It's just- We're missing any life.
Interesting.
Yeah, missing fun.
In both sections so far, community has been.
Community,
a big-
yeah, I would
Yeah.
love to
And
hear
geo-
from someone, in this perfect world of unlimited time and budget, what might change, could someone speak to the community piece that's missing and what might change if you had, unlimited time and budget and you brought that in, either from online or in person? Yeah,
I think the biggest thing is like sometimes the community just has like a lack of education when it comes to open source versus just one. Don't really realize how much goes into it, how much is connected, and how much impact they can have or lack of impact they can have just by their day-to-day activities.
yeah, they're a key component of the whole system, right? And sometimes we miss them.
There's a couple comments online about just outreach being so difficult with the surrounding community and just connecting with that community during the process.
Yeah, especially in a way that the community needs to hear it.
Yep.
So we could do a whole, we're not, there's experts on this, but like we do a whole class on that. There's so much that they're learning
They're
there.
making it meaning,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Not just dots on
Not
it.
just thoughts on a thing, like actually listening and hearing what people are saying. Yeah, it's a hard thing to get on.
In a way, and then capturing what you need to make changes with to make the system interactive. Yeah. Great. Anything else? Anything else that might change if you brought in your missing element about, let's say, geomorphology or anything, any other, or science?
There's another one online, which I think is really important too, is the community awareness of natural systems. So kind of the educational piece of
Can we read it?
getting the community engaged is one thing, but then, providing that information for them to, understand the benefits and things like that can also be very difficult.
Yes, yeah. We were talking, Brenda and I were talking about this a little bit when we first started talking about this class, is just how do you, it's easy when, and even this exercise, it's easy when all the components of the system are there and you can see them. But how do you get people to think bigger than that and think, like, what part of the system isn't here? What part of the system can't we see or might be invisible or isn't able to make the community meeting or that kind of thing? It's really challenging.
And I think that to exactly that point, that's why, and Bao mentioned it, that's why we have really tried to focus on multidisciplinary teams. And instead of just the H&H, if it's H&H only, you're missing out on a lot of stuff. So I think that's why it's so important to bring people to the table and to have them help you find those gaps in your own bias and perspective. Everybody, if this whole class went out and looked at one single site and wrote down what their most important thing is that they were seeing with their eyeballs, everything would be different, right? And so having lots of people to help look through other people's eyes, I think is super important. Really important.
It's okay. We're working new systems here. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Mary.
There's another comment.
Yeah.
I think it's important because it touches on something that we're going to talk about in this program. I'll just read it as is. I think there are some instances where community appears to be missing, but project partners / champions are bridging community to the project. We might not always see this directly, at least on my projects.
Good point. And there's like an invisible thread in the system that is good to be aware of, but you might not know about. That's good. Would you mind switching it back? Oh, thank you. Laura, if you could, oh, yeah.
Question online, what's H&H?
Oh,
Somebody answered.
okay. Well, I
Sorry.
won't say that broke my heart, but it's just, H&H, okay, it's answered.
It's answered.
It's
Okay.
answered, but I think it's a good point
It's a good
that
point.
if you're online, make sure you're following the chat, because this is
This is
killer, because people are
Yes.
responding and
I missed the response.
really good.
And yeah, don't be afraid to ask those questions if you have them.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
every science has their own acronyms, right? And so we don't all share our own acronistic, well, it's not acronyms, but we don't share our acronyms evenly. So if someone throws something out, for sure, question.
And engineers are notorious for.
Oh,
Yeah. For which we deeply apologize.
And I'm very guilty of, like, in a meeting, hearing those acronyms and just writing them down. I'm not asking the question because I don't want to be like the guy in the room.
Should tell the room too, just for those that don't want to speak up.
I don't want to be single.
Oh, H, hydrology and hydraulics.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you guys don't have the,
Yeah.
yeah, hydrology and hydraulics. And for some reason, they.
For an effort to avoid acronyms? Myself included.
Water that comes from the sky. Water that moves. Great, thank you. Last piece on systems thinking, while you're thinking about your project and future projects, and we're talking about who might be missing. And we don't have to talk about, but I would love for you just to take away from this, what is keeping that piece from being seen or recognized on your project? So as you move forward and we go to field visits and other classes, just kind of thinking about who might not be represented on your projects or the projects we're visiting, and then what's keeping them from being there? And is there, as watershed ambassadors and leaders in your industry, what can we do to make that barrier less? So we're just bringing more perspectives to the table. And that's systems thinking.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, yeah. Has anyone ever read Stephen Hawking's The Universe in a Nutshell? Oh yeah, neither have I. It's great. But yeah,
Yeah, me neither, that's dumb.
yeah, that's weird. It does that. Okay, point is, it's a lot of complex things. We're gonna get into it and we've been into other things, but if you need some good late night reading. Stephen Hawking. All right, next up. So we talked about systems thinking. We're on to the transect, which Jesse's gonna do. Would you like this?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah. All right. First thing, has anybody seen this before? A few, excellent, cool. So this is something that I refer to almost daily. It was developed by a very famous planner named Andres Duany, and his practice. We refer to it as the urban. We refer to it as the urban transect. And the reason that it's called a transect is because it's literally trying to illustrate a cross-section of urbanity. And we use this as a tool to really help us understand how we're managing systems. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about in this class or this group is how we're dealing with natural systems and human systems coming together. And so the reason the transect is really important is it's a really easy way for us to think about urbanity from the far left to the far right. And the way that it works is on the far left, you have what we call T1, which is that natural zone, or as I like to call it, the unused or wild. Some people don't like the term wild because they think of like tigers and lions and stuff. But really that idea of T1 is that it's wild, it's unused, it really has not been imprinted by humans. And then if you go all the way to the far right, you have that ultra urban or T6 zone. And that T6 zone is like completely used, human dominated. It is where it's like downtown, it's where there's tall buildings and all of that. And so we will refer to the transect quite a bit in this class and in the academy. And we want you to just sort of understand it at first, just sort of high level. So the first question I want to ask is, what do you notice the most about the difference in zones? Plants, green? Yeah. What do you notice when you get further to the right about that? More impervious. Yeah. You guys that table gets the star. Absolutely. I mean, if you notice nothing more, you're going to notice that if you squinted your eyes and you could see zero details, you would notice that it's super green over here and super gray over there. I also love, what do you notice about the size of the trees? They get smaller. That's realsy. That's realsies. Yeah. I mean, I think, and we have tried to replicate different things for this transect, but something that I think Duani's group did really well is they captured so much in such a simple diagram. What else do you notice about the forms of things? And by that, I mean, yeah. Good job, Janet. Was that you?
More squares, less organic forms, a lot more angles.
Excellent. Yes. So
Comment on here about topography. which I think is-
topography, good. Yeah. So, and I think they probably could have done a little more on that, but we'll give them a break. But yes, absolutely. The further over here, you've got topography, you've got organic forms. The further we get to the right, man, we're talking squares and rectangles. Good. How about the width of our circulation systems? Good. Probably, responding to something, the roads get wider, the buildings get taller, right? Density. So, and I will get more into this later on when we're talking about urbanization in the next class. But the basics here, when we start to talk about urbanization, are that urbanization is really two things. Number one, it's more people moving to an area and our response to more people moving into an area, right? So I want you to just kind of think about those two major components. As we go through this, we're going to hit on it again way more in the next section, but it's really important that you just sort of at a baseline, you get when we say the transect or when we say in that T1 zone, so on and so forth. Uncontrolled. Where am I pointing? There we go. So when we're looking at the left-hand side of the transect, we're talking about that natural or more natural, and I'm going to use natural in air quotes a little bit because there is very little natural left in our world, unfortunately, meaning that there's very little that people have not touched. But when we're talking about that, we're looking at that sort of natural systems. We're looking at the natural hydrologic cycle. These are for the most part, these are really big picture and actually simple systems, right? And nature knows how to do it, but nature knows how to do it on a big scale. In other words, if you don't touch anything, it's just doing this, right? Snow falls, it melts, it runs down and it goes down into the river and the river makes its way and then it evaporates and it turns into snow. Yay, it's all really good at a big picture, right? So very simple, big picture systems. And to the right, when we get over to the right-hand side, we're really dense. We start to have to manage very complex systems, a lot of systems, because we are integrating those human systems into those natural systems. And so we're going to get into this a little bit too. Don't worry about taking this slide in, because there's a lot there, but it's something that, again, we'll talk about as we're talking about those systems. And so when we start to shift the idea of the transect to those natural systems and to the way that our waterways work, we start to think about that wild area, which is, I think, the focus here is going to be on natural systems today. We're really thinking about the wild areas, those areas that are relatively still intact, where those natural systems are still intact. And what do we notice about the way our waterways work in T1? This side of the class. This side's been doing great. Say it again. Follows the topography. Say it again. Naturally, yep. Anything else? A lot of space to move, yeah. And how do humans benefit up in that T1, T2 area? There's a list there if you want a cheat sheet. This is where I think there's a big association with great air quality. It's super peaceful. There's a lot of space. The water quality is generally perceived to be very good because it has not been impacted by our human systems. Maybe it hasn't been used and reused, right? So those kinds of things are really good. I think also something that's interesting, somebody hit on the economics. Generally, the perspective is that when you're far to the left or you're up in that T1, T2, generally speaking, things cost less to manage, things cost less to do, so on and so forth. And the only risks, what are the risks that we have? Especially in our region, it's like avalanches, natural disasters, hailstorms, right? We don't have a whole lot of risks when we get down there. And so, or when we're up there. So we'll start to talk about how risk changes as we get further right in the transect also. So any thoughts or comments here? Good, I'll just move to the next piece of that. So when we really get into from a water systems piece, and I apologize, this is so blurry. I was supposed to retype this and I didn't. So it's on me. But when we're in those systems, in those zones, T1 and T2, things like our floodplains, ponding, all of those things are just already happening, right? So those natural floodplains, they're just there. Nature's already kind of sorted that out. Ponding, lakes, wetland and riparian characteristics, they're just sort of already there. And so as we start to move to the right, that changes, and we'll talk about that. When you get into T2, I think T2 and T3 in particular are really interesting because those are where things get really blurry. In particular, T2, really blurry, where you've got that sort of rural development. A lot of the rural development is still responding to the natural systems. You see your roads curving along a stream or a waterway. You see things giving space to those riparian areas because you don't need it. A lot of space to be had. So we're going to be thinking about this in terms of how the systems, the natural systems change and the human systems become more dominant. Any thoughts here? We'll continue to ask for your thoughts and encourage you to chime in, Kristen.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, but not about it. But I just wanted to check in because we're going to use these terms about like the T1 and the T2 and T. So I want to make sure everyone's comfortable with our new acronym. And if there's any, especially with that T2 and T3, like that kind of blurry space, if there's any clarifications or questions about where that, if there's no real line, how do you know between the two? If there's any questions or clarifications about that needed in the room or online.
Much about that, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the risk kind of in the T1, T2, because I don't know, to my mind, I'm thinking if I'm out in a T1 zone, maybe I'm more at risk because I don't have some of the infrastructure that would keep me like the hospital.
That's an interesting perspective. Yeah. So I think I'm going to try and repeat this so everybody can hear. There could be more risk on the human system side because like circulation or your services and those kinds of things are not as prevalent. Did I restate that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent observation. I mean, certainly that's where the natural systems, the further you are left, the natural systems are predominant. They're prevalent, right? So the human systems are you're sort of just responding. If you live way up in the sticks, you're accepting a higher level of risk, right? And so we'll talk a lot about risk too, because the whole point here, I think, is that we're going to be talking a lot about trying to mimic natural processes or use natural processes to our advantage where they just don't typically work as well in an urban system. And so that idea of adapting and managing things in a way that they can all work together. I saw a hand coming up back there. Speak loudly if you can.
Just a comment on the natural floodplain for T2. I guess I'm wondering where, like roadways and canyons fall on that spectrum.
Yeah.
Because like the most natural place to put a roadway is right in the floodplain because that's the low point and that's the flattest area. But you don't have that natural floodplain. So is that going to be like Glenwood Canyon, for example? Is that rural or is that going to be more on the urban side of the transect?
Another really good observation. I think I'm gonna defer a little bit of that until we get into the urban systems more, but that is so. There's really three, but I'll say like, who are the two hardest entities you typically have to work with for those of you who work in public infrastructure? And ditch companies. Whoever said ditch companies, yeah. So railroads and ditch companies, and we'll put transportation departments in there too. Because, yeah, right? I mean, where's the easiest place to put a sewer? River. What's the number one thing we have to deal with along the Platte? Sewers, roadways, right? Like, it makes sense to put it there. And in a lot of ways, what we're trying to get across in this academy is in our urban development along the way, we, humanity, have made a lot of decisions that have made it a lot harder for us to do what nature did on its own. Because we've made decisions based on stuff like, well, it's easier because water rolls downhill and roads need to be built where it's easier to build roads or railroads and so on and so forth. So we're going to be talking some about that. But I don't have an answer to that, by the way. I'm just up here, killing time because we have lots of time, right? Yes.
Can environments skip T2, such as in Boulder, when the landscape goes from natural mountains straight into urban environment?
I mean, sure. I think I'm going to go back to the Dewani drawing because I think it's easier to make this point. This sort of systemizes the concept into equal widths, right? This could be a line. To that point, there are definitely places in Boulder or other places where and even in the plains, right? The plains, if you pull up a map of, somebody had Nebraska background, right? You pull up a map of Nebraska. It's like agriculture and then these little towns or cities and those, there's not a lot of buffer. Because everybody's like, we need our human systems to be together. If we work together, it's going to be easier for us to make those systems, our sewer systems, our electrical systems, whatever. So urbanity, you need each other. So that's.
Say even go to eastern Denver metro area, right? Where we are continuing to build. We are going from T1 all the way to a T4. So it's a T5.
Yeah, yep.
In some of those, they call them town centers or whatever, you're right on the edge. And it's still moving. It's a system that's gonna continue to grow from there, but you do have those interfaces, right?
Yep. Yeah. So I love using this as a standpoint. We use a lot in our office. We talk a lot about sort of where we are in the transect. It's just a good tool. And so we're gonna be moving from, today's really more about natural systems. Again, we're gonna be moving towards a break. And we made up time, by the way, right?
Good job.
Good job, everybody.
Phyllis?
If you have thoughts, please, please bring them up. Any other thoughts?
You were gonna.
Yeah, go back a slide. I think there's
This one?
I think there's the perception that the T2 somehow is having like a reduced water quality and water impact. But I mean, if we think of most of our agricultural land probably falls into that, and it's probably one of the greatest negative contributors to linearization of streams and water quality and sediment, like all that stuff, right? So I mean, I guess that T2 seems like, okay, you could be talking about USDA-ish type lands that are, interspersed, or you could be talking about something that's like row crops and, has substantial impacts.
I love that you brought that up. I think another, maybe, and there's a lot of arguments on this, by the way, like, it's a lot of different ways you can spin this, but when we think of water consumption, for instance, water consumption per capita in, say, a T2, if you're talking about ag, our water consumption is really high. But there's all these balancing points. We're going to talk about balance after the break here a little bit, but these are excellent points. There's not one silver bullet or magic, whatever. Magic wand.
At that point that we're facing more challenging, complex problems in many of these transect areas, including urban and thank you. And that we need to rely more on our systems and people we're not bringing in, because there's just so much to think about. We can't do it we can't do it alone.
And I'll leave you with this too. I think we can be idealists and we can say what we're really, and Mary's gonna talk about this with Veg too, but we can be idealists and say, well, we're really trying to mimic T1, systems in our urban areas. And that is just not possible. Let's just get that out there right now. We are not going to be doing this in our T4, 5, and 6 zones. What we can do is learn from those and say, how do they work? And how do they work beyond just H&H? How do they work beyond just moving water from one side of a parcel to another, or from one side of a city to another? How can we bring some of those other advantages of the way nature is working into our urban systems and make them work better? So that's what, when we talk about mimicking, we're trying to really mimic characteristics and qualities rather than the way the whole thing actually works, because we're not getting there. Or even functions.
Stream function, the
Right.
five elements comes back. And
Yeah.
how can we mimic, how can we bring in some of those functions that we see in nature to our built environment? And we'll show you later, the things can look really different, but still provide similar functions. So, there's the riparian, natural riparian width that works as a water quality improvement function. But then there's also a fire retention facility that provides water quality function. So you have to start thinking about the function and how can we bring it in and recognize what we're doing to bring that into the system. It may not look like a natural system, but it may provide the same functions that we
Work it close.
might be missing or get close.
Yeah. Riparian function, that bottom bullet is really the one that, as we were kind of going through figuring, this has been a little bit of an adaptation process, because the urban transect that Duani did really was focused on density and human services. And so, in trying to look at this, it's like riparian function is the number one thing that just gets diminished. Because we're pretty good at figuring out how to move water from one place to the other. We're pretty good at, even, for the most part, understanding how to make those systems stable, not erode so well, or not erode so much, whatever. What we're not so good at yet is replicating all of the things that riparian systems do for us on the larger scale. So, break.
So just want to mention that great conversation. this morning we talked, we did the big picture stuff, and then this afternoon after the break, we're gonna dive into those 5 elements and what they look like. They're natural, in the natural system, like like Troy's photo, in their natural habitat. But also just the functions of what they do in that T1, T2 area. So now we're gonna take a 15-minute break. If you could be back in the room at 10:15, that would be great. There's coffee, there's bathroom, there's fruit. And if you're online, you can get up from your computer. Take a break too, stretch your legs.
Honestly, I'll leave it. Downside.
Can we get some tape to hold our tape down?
No one's gone that far.
All right, we're back. Good job being back at 10:15.
Melissa was trying to take our tape with.
I'm always really impressed when people know what time it is. I live, it doesn't matter. It's fine. Okay. Thank you for coming back. Does everyone have some food and coffee and you're all set? Water? All right. So this morning, we have covered the systems thinking and the transect, and next we're going to move into the 5 elements. We're going to break each one of these down, talk about their function and how they work really in that T1 and T2 environment, maybe slipping in a little to T3. That sounds weird when I say it that way, but I think you all know what I'm saying. I think for the 5 elements, Jesse's up first, right? Are you?
Yep.
I don't know,
Okay.
am I?
Yep.
Oh.
Community values.
There you have it.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay. Everybody see this image okay? Anyone know where this is? Take a look at it. You're not allowed, Brent.
What's your guess?
Kelly,
Denver.
where?
Louisville.
Good. This is the National Western. Right here. And this is the old water treatment plant that is now a park. So what do you notice about the river here? This is the South Platte. This is on the north edge of Denver at National Western. What do you notice about the river? It's a little tough to see. I apologize. I'm gonna have to talk to the photographer about this quality, but this is in the, I think this is in the 30s. What do you notice about the river? Yeah. So what happened? Say it loud. Say it proud. Yeah. Yeah, so this is, I mean, this is pretty common, right? Like as our cities and urban areas got bigger, more dense, more roads, more railroads, we noticed that our waterways had to do more work in less space. Or we made our waterways do more work in less space. And so, yeah, what you see down here is the really wide and flat trapezoid that we now know as the Platte going through downtown. And then you can see down here, you can see a really big ditch, actually, which is more noticeable than the river, which is super interesting, right? And then way down here, you can see the Platte going back to its normal life, where it just kind of cruises. And the floodplain is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 mile to 2 miles wide in some places, right? So you go from this, which is, call it 200 feet at best, to that mile-ish or wider. So I think, I don't know, what did I put here? Oh, yeah, just I should be looking over there. Sorry. Understanding how we're adapting is really important because it has those impacts on human life quality. So when we're talking about the 5 elements, something that we really try to get across in the academy is that we're in the business of balancing these 5 things. In other words, one thing should not have all the priority at the peril of the others. Anybody grow up in the 80s?
Yeah. 70s.
70s. Okay, in the 80s, the graphic equalizer used to look like this. We used the idea of knobs or of the graphic equalizer where you're constantly adjusting these elements to make the best balance work for whatever the goal is of the project, right? And so in some cases, hydraulics is number 1. All we got to do is figure out how to get water from one place to the other. But it's not typical that if you really step back, it's not typical that that's the only thing that's important. And so what we want to do is start to think about the other elements as components of that balancing act to figure out what's best for our community. And so sometimes we're making trade-offs and saying, well, maybe stability or maybe hydraulics is something that we're gonna lean out in favor of a better community amenity, or in favor of better vegetation or habitat, or in favor of better sediment transport, right? Because we're thinking about these systems in the big picture. So I'm gonna go back to this, right? Right here, we see major changes in that system, and this is only, like, there's probably a mile of river in this view. And so when we talk about balancing things out, we're stepping back and we're thinking about how our projects, how our planning processes really use the graphic equalizer to try to balance things out for the best. Thoughts or comments there before I move on? I want to make sure I'm giving space for some of these concepts.
Well, I would say this is where some of that cost piece, kind of the graphic equalizer, but then, you know, you're sort of weighing all the balance of that with what you could actually accomplish with your budget. And so
Yep.
you are looking for that value piece of all of this. So the comment earlier about, well, where does cost come in? It absolutely kind of works with the way the little knobs go up and down depending on what your opportunities are and alternatives.
I'll just add, Jess, I think that's a great image to think about with the equalizer. And one of the other things that you are balancing in that is also the risk
Yes,
related to the push and pull or the up and down of the equalizers, and recognizing that, are those risks acceptable? If not, how can we mitigate it without compromising this?
right. That's a really good point, and I think you can assign cost and risk variables to each of these things, right? Where you can start to find, you know, some of these equalizers have like 50 of these things. You could sort of associate subcategories to each of those. Yeah.
For a comment from online, Jess, saying that we are trying to balance the elements limits the opportunity to look for synergies. For example, improved vegetation outcomes can also improve hydrologic outcomes.
Yes. Hopefully, folks online, we got a comment that folks online are having a hard time hearing the room, so thank you. So if you're speaking, try to project. Some of us are more gifted than others, right, Laura? Laura and I were just talking about that. Okay, so moving into community values, one thing that I really like people to walk away from this is, and we'll talk more about this again, but is the fact that we would not be managing anything natural in our systems if it weren't for us, right? The only reason we're managing our streams, managing our natural systems is because of people. But when we start to understand life quality values and things like that, we can really start to understand what the importance is of integrating those systems. So this is where, excuse me, the question came up about costs or cost benefit, economics, those kinds of things. To me, these six things are 6 components that I put together as sort of life quality metrics. And we can lump that into placemaking. The term placemaking is kind of a common one, but what we're really getting at is experiential qualities, economics, right? That's costs and benefits. So it's what you spend to do something, but it's also what you get out of it. Long-term versus short-term, all of those things apply. A vision is implying that we have done a planning process, or you all have done a planning process, and is what we're doing, no matter how big or small, fitting into that greater planning process. Resilience, I put every buzzword I could into the red one. Resilience, sustainability, and durability. But this is for real, right? Like, we're learning better that our natural systems are better served if they can heal themselves, if they can work in a variety of conditions. Health and well-being, that should be something that is at the top of everybody's list. We've been pretty good about making sure that we're addressing safety and health and well-being. Equity is something that, despite the press that we've been getting. I still think it's very important for us to be considering how we're spreading out benefits, how we're making sure that everyone, every community are all benefiting from these services and from the way that our infrastructure works. And then experience, I talked about that in the beginning, but this is really important, right? This is what nails down things like recreation, which in our word cloud was popping up really big. It's also in the ways that our infrastructure both responds to and supports our architecture, our urban design, all of those kinds of things are really important. So these are the 6 things that we kind of put in that bucket of community values. And those indicators, this is, I like to put this into a list of like a filter. So when you're starting to consider what you're doing from a project standpoint or a planning standpoint, you start to ask these in a question, right? Are we providing equitable conditions? Are we enhancing the context and the experience? We'll talk a lot about context. Are you enhancing that? Are you working towards that vision? Are you supporting the economics responsibly? Are you improving people's health and well-being, where they live? Do they feel good? Do they get to breathe clean air, et cetera? And is it going to sustain and be resilient? And so remember when I introduced the idea of urbanization is a whole lot of people move to one place. And the second component of that is, are you listening? Quiz, your response, good job. The response, right? A lot of people move to one place and we respond. And so this is one way to respond to drainage, right? Those adaptations that we make to accommodate these kinds of things, those are those interventions. That's our response that we're talking about. And I guess I like to ask the question of, is that the best way that we can do this? And a lot of times what we're dealing with is we're stuck with this. I mean, this condition exists in a lot of places. And it's because decisions were made along the way. Again, we like to believe that people made the best decisions that they could with the information that they had at the time. And so a lot of times now we're going back to having to figure things out. But I like to bring this up because, has anybody been here to the Ponte Guard? Yeah? Did you walk across? You didn't walk across. Okay. This is the Ponte Guard. I think it's, 40 to 60 AD. Been around for a couple thousand years. This piece of infrastructure was built to do a few things, primarily to move water, right? The source was over here, city over here, moves water across the top of that, and it gave the city water. It gave the city head pressure. Oh, sorry, this is in France. This is the Pont du Gard. It's in France. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Thought it was in Rome all this time.
It is Roman. It is a Roman aqueduct.
You never, now I know it's.
Yeah, now you know. History lesson today.
Later.
9 years I've been showing this slide.
Italy.
Yes. But what I love is that this structure, kind of has lots of different jobs. It was moving water. It created head pressure, right? They had baths that actually had pressure, but also it moved people. The bottom rung there is about moving people, and it's really wide. It's a little wider than this room. I've been there and walked across it. It's a little wider than this room, and it could accommodate a lot of people moving back and forth. It's also beautiful, right? It was intended to portray this image of we are a civilized community. We can build beautiful things. We have smart engineers who can build stuff that functions and is a symbol of our, civilization. And I really love this because all of those things are still true today. Quite literally, you can walk up here. I did it. I could see where the water was disconnected. If you could reconnect it, this thing would still work. 2,000 years later, right? So what is the, oops, I went too far. What's the average right now that we're designing our infrastructure to last? 20 to 30 years. Debbie's right. That is, for perspective, most of us will have careers that last longer than 20 to 30 years. And that's what we're designing our infrastructure to do right now, is last 20 to 30 years. And I'm not saying that we have to build this all the time, but I am saying that we ought to be considering all of those different functions beyond just getting water from the left to the right, you know? So something that I will really try to get people to change their minds on a little bit are thinking about how community values, how the impacts that we have on that placemaking, those 6 things that I had in there, how we start to think about those as not, they'd be nice to have if we had enough money, or they'd be nice to have if we had enough time. These are not added values. We hear this all the time. Well, maybe we can sneak in some trees. Maybe we can sneak in a trail or something like that. These are not added values for our infrastructure. They're essential. And we need to be thinking about them that way. And it's like turning a cruise ship, right? This is not something, we're not driving a sports car here. We can't always make those changes very quickly. But if we can start to think that way, think systematically and systemically, we can start to make these moves and make essential values the way we plan and design our infrastructure. Oh, there's your slide. I put this in just for you. This, yeah, Mary loves this slide. So it's not just about moving water from the left to the right. There is this synergy of our infrastructure in those 6 elements. I skipped ahead. This was supposed to be maybe wrong. But so here's my hokey little pledge. That we're really trying to get people to think this way, right? You as stream ambassadors are really that first line of trying to change the way we're thinking about things and trying to implement change from the beginning. And so the pledge is that human interventions for infrastructure, they're adaptations that complement and enhance urbanization. And they're not just added value. It's not something we just throw in. They're essential.
The question, Jess,
Yes.
just, how many of us here feel like we are either equipped or empowered in our role or on our project to consider community values? Hands up if you feel like you're equipped and empowered. Okay. And it's just, and in those online, feel free to do a thumbs up as well. I think it's just something to consider as we're going through this program, because I've heard that and I felt that way 13 years ago. It's like, well, that's not my job. Or that's not within my sphere of influence.
Yeah, or I'm just not, I don't feel empowered at my fill in the blank employer, municipality, county, company, whatever. Yeah. It's not easy. That's why it's turning cruise ship, Andy.
I would say I'm always willing to make the argument, but I feel like I'm nagging. Okay, like, so almost like, well, hopefully we gain some skills in this course to present it in a way that invites collaboration instead of, oh, we should be doing it this way, but it is difficult.
It is, it's a challenge and, you know, we're here to support you. You know, I mean, really, a lot of this comes from a group of thinkers that are starting to gain, right? We're building slowly. And that I will say that this group has heard feedback over the course of, what's it been, 8 years, 7 years, however many years. We've heard feedback that they are starting to see change slowly, but surely. People are actually starting to go, hey, wait a second. We can actually, we can actually shift this a little bit in favor of this. And I think that the language alone, just the idea that so many people now know what the 5 elements even are, is success. Keep up the good work.
Is there be any point in this series of others that where it's going to focus on us empowering ourselves? Like some of us have the ability to change the regulations in the communities that we're in. So can we focus a little bit about how we need to think about that whole process.
Do we still have the change management
Stuff.
thing?
I think as the class goes on, so this, am I understanding this right? This class goes all the way through the academy. Right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, excellent. So yes. I can confidently say, so part of what we start to do later on after we get out of the first 3 webinar series is we dig a little bit deeper into those tools. And some of it is about what Andy described, which is like, how do we approach these things? Like if we're in a meeting, you know, just even having the confidence to say, this is how we have these kinds of discussions is really important. And we'll be relying on all of you just as much. I will say that this group doesn't have all the answers, although there's some really skilled professionals that know how to spin some of this stuff in a way that's a little easier to be digested. We're going to also be relying on each other because we've got people in this room who have been successful on some other level. And so I really appreciate that what we've seen as past classes even stay in touch with each other and start to have those kind of conversations. So I don't know if I directly answered your question, but the idea is, yes, we're going to really try to do that. Those thoughts before Ryan jumps up here?
Just love to hear your thoughts on, it seems like to your question about the community values seem like they fall under the people and the, you know, but what about the economic benefits or the risk lowering? Like, it seems like there's some quantitative, right word, yeah, like quantitative money or time that is also achieved through looking at.
Absolutely. And because you told me I had to stick with natural systems, I'm going to talk more about that as we move.
Next time.
Yeah.
Everybody, there's a script and we follow it.
Yeah. Yeah. Kristen has cracked the whip. Historically, we're all over the place. And so we will talk more about that though.
Okay, great.
We will. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on to H&H, or the hydrology and hydraulics. So who wants to give a definition of hydrology?
Study of what falls from the sky and quantifying it for different types of probability of storm events.
That's a very good definition. Yeah, that is
Can you repeat that?
impressive.
You get a gold
That was
star.
really good.
Yeah. So this is what I found just from the USGS, you know, about the science that encompasses the occurrence, distribution, movement of properties in water, you know, within the whole global system. And so it's that relationship between how water moves throughout the environment, each phase of the hydrologic cycle or the water cycle that we'll look at. And this is why, you know, going back to what Brent was talking about earlier, this is why, you know, the idea that everything is connected is super important, right? Because even within the water cycle and the hydrologic analyses that we go through, you have to keep in mind so many different things and so many aspects of how things are interrelated to really understand the processes. And so that's why focusing on the natural systems today is important, because if we can better understand, you know, really how the natural system is reacting to changes in watershed, changes in characteristics, changes in climate change, all of those things, you know, it just gives us the better tools to be able to use that within, you know, the work that we do.
And here's a definition from online that I like how simple it is. How much water, where and when.
There you go. Much less wordy than what I've got.
Just in case.
Yeah, so Val found a definition is how much water, where, and when is kind of when you really break it down, I think that's a really good definition.
It's Robert Salazar.
Yeah. So when we talk about the water cycle, and I like this version much better than Jesse's version, because this is the
Same little water drop.
yeah,
guy.
this is the children's version of the water cycle, and which I really like, one, because it's fun, but also because I think what this shows when you actually take the time and you spend some time looking at it is the different components of how everything's related. And you can even see on here, it's got runoff in multiple areas, right? So it's not just a singular runoff. in a sense. You know, you've got runoff that's going into lakes, you've got runoff going into rivers, you've got runoff, you know, going in all these different directions. And so, you know, when we're thinking about these natural processes, we have to keep that in mind, right? It's not just a singular focus with how water moves throughout the system.
I had to look up sublimation because I never considered how ice and snow can get back into the system without running off.
That's what happens to the ice cubes in your freezer, man. They sublimate
Sure.
away.
I rotate.
That's why your ice maker just gets all clogged in.
And this is you know, another reason why, I think Val had mentioned it earlier, but, you know, we're not expecting all of you to leave this class as experts in every single one of these elements, right? And so I am definitely not an expert in ice and snow and how those systems work. So, you know, if I had to work on a project that dealt with that, I'd have to ask somebody, I'd have to get somebody else involved. You know, I'm definitely not an expert in geomorphology. So that's why Troy and I have worked together on a lot of projects, you know, because he can bring that into the process and help us understand how things are working within the overall system. I think another key idea that was brought up was nature knows best. So it's this idea of equilibrium. So all of these systems are dynamic. They're constantly moving, constantly changing. Troy, you could probably go into more with the stream corridor and how things change over time, but there's sort of this idea of equilibrium where if you just let something kind of do its thing for long enough, eventually it'll kind of find an equilibrium. And what we're trying to do, you know, with our industry is kind of force that equilibrium with our projects. So I always say that working with nature is going to be the best approach because it's how many billions of years it's kind of figured out what it's doing. And when we try to control nature, I think that's when we end up with a lot of issues. And getting back to the risk component, I think that's where, you know, we can unintentionally increase the level of risk, you know, based off how we try to control the natural processes. Any thoughts, questions on the water cycle?
I will change the image.
Okay.
On the next slide.
Can you make these move for me?
Nice.
Animate them. Dance around. Tough crowd.
So, you know, when we're looking in our industry, I think, you know, it's easier for us to kind of break it down into these components, you know, when we're looking at watershed changes. If you're going from a very natural system to a very urban system along that transect from T1 to T2, we kind of talked about it earlier, you're getting more impervious surfaces, so your runoff is going up, your peak flows are going up, velocities, energy, all of that is going up. And then at the same time, we're losing the infiltration, the evapotranspiration. There was a comment online earlier with the tree canopy. You know, in urban environments, you have much less tree canopy. So that evapotranspiration process is now lower than it would be in a natural system where you've got these massive trees doing that work for you. And then groundwater and flow. But one thing as we were talking that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to mention here is that, especially for engineers, we can kind of get siloed into this model of thinking, right? But when we talk about watershed changes and we talk about natural processes, there's so many other things that can influence a watershed. So it's not just the urbanization or the human component of it. There's also natural systems that change watersheds. So any thoughts on what are natural processes that would change your watershed? Beavers, it's a good one. Fire. Yep, that's a huge one, especially in California right now.
Climate modification.
Climate modification, yep.
There's a comment online, mudslides.
Mudslides, that's a good one. I had that on my list too. Flooding, yep. Large flood events, the 2013, I think we all remember that. The you know, the Big Thompson River was devastated in areas. And then one that hasn't been mentioned unless it's online is agriculture. You know, that is a big one, especially on the plains that can have a significant impact on your watershed. I think you mentioned earlier that the impacts to water quality are huge because of agriculture. And that's a watershed change. And so, you know, when we're thinking about these natural processes, not just what we're doing to them, it's these larger, you know, events. And I wanted to go back to the risk too, because I think we spent 2 hours during one of our planning meetings talking about risk. And how, you know, within our industry, we're kind of looking at balancing those risks with every single project. And risk is also very contextual. So there was the comment earlier about, you know, the level of risk within canyons, you know, within your floodplain. So by putting our roads, putting our infrastructure within that canyon, we're actually introducing a much higher level of risk because there's nowhere for, you know, the floodplain to go. It's all concentrated. And so I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're, you know, thinking about these natural systems. So that is hydrology, very high level hydrology. Any questions, thoughts on watershed change? We'll get into a lot more of the actual components, you know, as we talk about urbanization. Al, did you have something?
Maybe again, a question, hands raised up. How many of us in this room feel like we're empowered to influence hydrology? Just wanted to make that note, and that's something that we'll be thinking about as we go through the academy, but I just wanted to get a sense from this group who felt like they could change the numbers that influences our design. Anything online? The question was, how many of us feel empowered to actually influence hydrology?
Anything online? Okay. So then,
A lot of the planners, I just want to acknowledge.
hydraulics. Who wants to do the hydraulic definition?
Does water get from A to B?
Go.
Repeated.
How water gets from A to B. That is also a much less wordy sentence than I have.
It's the diagram.
It's the diagram. It's the moving draw.
Less worried than the fundamentals of hydraulic engineering.
Yeah. So this is another definition that I found is it's the application of those principles, of those fluid principles. And you know, one of the things that one of the terms that I kind of started thinking about was going through this was those transport processes. And so even in natural systems, you have transport processes. That's the runoff. That's how, you know, water is moving throughout the water cycle. And then when you start thinking of those same transport processes with the hydraulic components, that's where you're getting into the collection, the flood containment, storage, control, all of those things that, you know, we're implementing on our projects, you know, every single day. And so one is kind of the study of how water moves, and one is the actual application of how we move water from A to B, which is a great definition. So it's the movement of water in our physical systems. It's the applied science of it. Since I am a stormwater engineer, I kind of think in hydrographs. Is everybody familiar with what a hydrograph is? Anybody not familiar with a hydrograph? Okay.
I'm gonna guess there's some folks who are.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely,
So what the hydrograph is, it's basically a graphical representation of how the flow changes within a system, a stream corridor, or a detention pond outlet structure, things like that. It's showing how your flow on the y-axis changes over time on the x-axis. And so when we're looking at these two hydrographs that I've got on the screen, we've got one that is what's called the unurbanized watershed response. And so that's the green line, and what it's showing is what your peak flow rate would be on an unurbanized watershed over time. And what's the biggest difference you can see between them, between the two, the green and the blue line? Yeah. So it's lower peak flow. Why is that? Why would a natural system have a lower peak flow than time of concentration? the level of imperviousness, the infiltration within the site, all of those transport processes we've talked about. So that's where getting back to that natural system, if you can understand how that water is, being transported within the watershed and what the response of that watershed is, then when you move to an urbanized system, the blue line, you can better understand how that response is going to be based off those same transport processes. So with the blue line, you get a much higher peak flow because of the lack of pervious surfaces, the lack of vegetation. Your time of concentration is faster, typically because you have harder surfaces that move water more quickly. And then what's the other thing that you notice with down at the bottom where it says lag time?
How quickly you reach the peak?
How quickly you reach the peak. Yep. So again, in these natural or unurbanized watersheds, your peak is lower, but then it's also going to take longer to get to that peak because often water is moving much slower through the vegetation, through the system. Whereas the urbanized, you have much faster moving water. And so when we're talking about the hydraulics, these are hydraulic factors that we've been discussing in Stream Academy for a couple of years, and these are sort of the primary components or factors of the hydraulics when we're looking at all of our design projects. So peak flow is one. That's a huge one. Detention basins, detention ponds, those are generally designed to attenuate that peak flow. So we're not just the water's not just blowing through the downstream system and eroding everything.
One comment in here that I just wanted to share from the online, it's going back to the question of, do you feel that as a planner, designer, scientist, can you influence the hydrologic regime? And they said, definitely start by assuming we can, and then it's easier to start asking how.
Yeah, that's great. So assuming we can, and then asking how. And that actually, Dave Skoudas was down here earlier, and Brent and I were talking to him, and he had a very similar quote that he actually, I guess, heard today, which was, you're gonna have to help me, Brent.
Maybe I'm not gonna remember it. Exactly.
But it was along those same lines of, rather than us immediately jumping to a solution, if we immediately jump to a solution, it eliminates the possibilities, right? So you need to kind of take that step back and evaluate what are all of the options, all of the possibilities, and then start getting to a solution. As engineers, we can often just jump right in. I know what I need to do. I know what the solution is, flood control, and we just design a concrete channel, which is a solution, but it's all contextual. So that's a good
You got it
comment.
right, Ryan. Skoudas just added it to the chat, but
Perfect.
we shouldn't consider solutions before we ponder possibilities.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Thanks, Dave. I think that speaks to that idea of considering all five so much, right? And to your point, if you're considering one use, one component, that solution can solve that problem, moving water A to B, but it's not considering all the rest. I think that's where possibilities come up.
Yep. And then back to sort of the risk analysis is you can come up with that solution of a very confined flood control channel, but how does that affect the level of risk within that community? When you have a very deep confined concrete channel running through a neighborhood, let's say Harvard Gulch is a perfect example. There's a lot of sections of Harvard Gulch that are vertical walled concrete sections. How does that increase the level of risk within that community?
Faster through that channel that would.
Yep. Yeah. So the water is moving way faster within that channel. More of a safety hazard, even when it's empty, right? So I don't remember what the height is, but if you look at some of the photos of Harvard Gulch, they're at least 10-foot walls, on the sides, which can be very dangerous. Any failure? Yep. That's a good one.
There's also like, the added, not a benefit, but a constraint is like the maintenance. Now you have to go in and refix that concrete whenever it fails. And the
Yep.
life cycle of the actual channel itself is not as long.
That's a great point, and it comes back to sort of that equilibrium, and Mary's gonna go into, fail safe versus safe fail, which is a great concept, and so it's that idea of, sometimes it may be less of a capital cost, to constrain the channel and put something in that's cheaper. But in 20, 30 years, you're gonna have to redo the entire thing. And so you're just pushing those capital costs further down the road. Whereas I think what the district and what I've seen a lot more in the last few years is if you focus more on the stabilization approaches with vegetation and things like that, you can actually, even though it in certain situations, it may be a higher capital cost for the project, long-term, you're allowing that system to sort of react and equalize within its defined corridor, which Troy will get into, rather than confining it and then having these massive failures.
Just want to share some thoughts from online, risk to lack of connectivity to the floodplain, reduced adaptability.
Use adaptability, yeah, that's a good one.
Going off the maintenance costs that you were talking about, I can't remember, I know SCOTUS gave like a statistic on that for Mile High projects, but
Yeah.
it was staggering the difference in maintenance costs between a concrete channel and a natural waterway. Yeah, when you stretch
Yeah.
out, and you look over time, how much it costs per linear foot to maintain those
Yeah.
is pretty staggering.
Dave, if you can put that in the chat, since you're on. But yeah, he did a presentation on, at one of the district symposiums about that, and it was definitely eye-opening about, what those costs are.
Give me a minute.
Okay.
Well, implementation costs as well too, right?
Implementation costs, yep.
You're gonna save money putting it in as well.
Yep.
You mentioned this about Mary's fail safe versus, but if it, like, if that channel clogged or if there's higher risk to the people around.
Yeah.
Outside the channel.
Yeah, exactly.
We're gonna hit on some of these concepts. So if you're hearing things like Mary's fail-safe, you're gonna learn about that. You're hearing terms that people know.
Yes, yeah, giving, foreshadowing.
Dave did post the little comparison in the chat.
Okay.
$2 per linear foot for maintenance versus 2,000 linear feet or dollars per linear foot for maintenance, once you go
Yep.
from.
So 1,000 fold.
$2 per linear foot for more of a natural system, versus $2,000 per linear foot for a concrete rigid system, with a lot of hard structures.
And if you're not following along in here, I'm sure that Laura can make available somehow. the options in here. Yeah. Because I don't want people to be like, oh my gosh, I'm missing whatever's being posted here. I think there's just a really important discussion about the word value that we will continue to discuss and ponder as we're going through this course.
So if we move on to the next factor, so peak flow is, the highest flow that's generated from that watershed based off those characteristics. And then you have, before I do that, so here's a table that I like showing too, and because it really highlights, you look at the comparison between the existing flow in column 1 and the proposed flow in column 2, for different level of storm events. So you've got, a tenth of or 0.1 inches up to, the 100-year event. Where's the highest range of variability, I guess, within those flows? In the most frequent storms. Troy, I think you'll get into that in more detail than I will, but I think that's an important concept to understand is, for a long time, the factor that, most stormwater systems were designed on was flood conveyance. So we're looking at the 100-year event, maybe the 50-year event in most cases. But, we have a lot of data and the district has a lot of data that shows it's actually the lower events that can create more impacts to the overall stream corridor and create more, erosion, maintenance issues, things like that, within the corridor as well. So then moving on to volume. So this would be the volume of water that's generated as a response to the watershed. So, again, with the unurbanized section or the watershed, the green area, that's that volume underneath the hydrograph. And so that's, essentially showing how much water is going to be generated during that response. And then the blue is the urbanized. So what are some of the differences here that people notice?
The same. The unurbanized watershed usually hold a lot more volume of water versus an urbanized watershed.
Yeah, my lines maybe not scaled correctly. Yeah, so that's definitely one. The other one I, was looking at is again with that lag time. The volume of the watershed within the stream corridor, how that relates to the lag time of the water moving through the system.
I'd probably just add to that, like, the lines and scales probably don't show it, but, comment about volumes. And really, if you were looking at these, and it was scaled, the area under the blue or your urbanized is just significantly greater than it is for an unurbanized. If you think that's relating to in a developed system, you have a lot of impervious areas, so you're getting so much more runoff versus an unurbanized or natural, so much water infiltrates or evapotranspirates that just from a volume standpoint, it can be, for the smaller events like Ryan had on that last figure, it can be orders of magnitude different or increase of volume that can occur to.
Yep. Again, that's the area under the urbanized. Duration, so we touched on this a little bit. It's that, the lag time between when your storm event happens to when you get that peak flow response. So again, should be seeing a pattern here, but again, in the natural system, that lag time is going to be much longer. When you get the initial storm event, when you're starting to see that peak flow. And again, that's because water is moving much slower through the system than it would be in an urban setting where, you have hard surface, impervious surfaces that just move the water so much quicker. Frequency. So this is what Troy just mentioned of when you start looking at the frequency of these events, especially when it relates to, climate change and how weather patterns and things like that are changing. Again, the frequency of those smaller events is much more significant than the frequency of those larger events. Which I think just, to Troy's point, shows that, even in the smaller events, because you have a higher volume, you have a higher peak flow, that's where we're seeing those impacts from the smaller events really happen within the stream corridors and the downstream systems. Basin characteristics. So Kristen mentioned, she kind of threw in some cooking analogy in there in my introduction. And so for those that don't know, before I was an engineer, I was a line cook and spent, a lot of time in restaurants and working in back of the house. And I still love cooking all the time. And so, to me, the basin characteristics are kind of like, within a recipe, right? It's the ingredients of a recipe. So you kind of have to understand how all of these ingredients within that recipe are working together to produce the outcome. If you've got one thing off or, one thing that changes, if you put too much salt in your sauce, nobody's going to like it. And so these are those characteristics where you're looking at the size of the shape of your watershed, your topography is going to have a significant impact. The drainage density, which is sort of that ratio of your stream length to your overall basin area. If you have a lot more streams within a watershed, you can move and collect water faster than if you have maybe a single stream corridor in a large watershed. Your soil and geologic properties, slope and elevation, which is your topography again, and then vegetation and land use. I think that's the most important one in my mind that often, like Jesse said earlier, is kind of the last thing for a long time we used to do. Just throw some plugs in there. It'll be fine. Which is not the case. And I think we're seeing that a lot more with these hydraulic factors of how it actually impacts, overall watersheds and stream corridors. And then the timing and seasonality, again, this is back to the, weather patterns, climate change. It's been, I don't know, 60, 70 degrees for a couple weeks now, which means we're probably going to get snow next week, like a foot of snow next week. So, considering those during the design and understanding how your watershed's going to react to it. Any questions? And we'll go into a lot more detail with the hydraulic components, how we can manage those responses with the urbanization. We'll talk about tools and ways to handle peak flows, things like that.
So the hydraulics and hydrology seem like they're a little more technical. So I'm curious how would you explain this if you're fifth grader? Imagine you have a fifth grader. First of all, and they're really nice and very interested in all things water. How would you explain hydraulics?
I think it's something that is so much more easily shown, like through a time lapse. Or some people will do like a closed system to show like how the water and erosion changes.
Yeah, that's great.
It's hard to describe.
It's super
That's
hard.
why it's hard to explain.
Yeah, exactly.
I would go with the two simple descriptions that have been made.
Yep.
Hydrology is how much water is at A, B, and C. Hydraulics is how does the water get from A to B and B to C.
Yeah, I think that's really good one. And then the visuals for sure, I think in a future class, it might be the next one, but we have a really good time lapse of Marcy Gulch and how that stream corridor changed even within a year time frame because of the hydraulics and because of how water was moving through that area.
Where is that area?
Marcy Gulch, Highlands Ranch, right? Yep.
Somebody online said they brought a flood table to their son's sixth grade class.
Yes.
To show how volume and intensity changed within the 3D model. How freaking cool.
If you ever get a chance to go up to CSU's hydraulic lab, I would definitely recommend it. That place is awesome. Especially when they have their scale models set up to where they're actually sending massive amounts of water through their systems to test how, flood control, inlets, all those things work. It's pretty cool.
I wanted to ask that question because we often go to open houses or we have to explain, or I'll come here so we have to explain flood maps or these complex things to people. And I've been in many open houses where someone's like, well, why did the flows change? And we're like, well, the peak volume. So having it translatable into something that you could explain to a fifth or sixth grader can make it easier to, not that the public is fifth and sixth, it's just that's a common level that we can all kind of understand and communicate to. Thanks for letting me jump.
They loved flooding the houses, this person said.
Yes.
So awesome.
All right, now on to the next category, and I think I probably, as much as any of the instructors, liked when the Stream Management Academy shifted from all of the equations and details when we're trying to really dig down into explaining, here's the way you cite or things, because this, for a lot of people, geomorphology is maybe not a completely new concept, but it's a little bit different way of thinking. And so to me, I think I really like the way the class is formed now where, the idea is to give people kind of a higher level understanding of what geomorphology means and how it's, or why it's worth considering in the projects you're working. So I have a much shorter definition than Ryan has, and really geomorphology what we're talking about is actually fluvial geomorphology, or how flowing water forms rivers or forms landscapes. And so with that, you're thinking about the water that is moving, and you're thinking about the sediment that is moving with it. And I love the background picture here because it looks so dissimilar to the types of streams that we all are used to designing, particularly in urban settings. But as this first class, we're talking about natural systems. And this is great because this is what a natural system is. It's so different than we'll call it sort of sanitized streams that we see in most urban settings. A starting point for geomorphology is to really consider the landscapes or watersheds that they're in. All of these images show different landscapes, and each one of these landscapes shape what the stream's going to do. We've got in the upper right and the lower left some certainly developed type of systems. And you have the stream is impacting the landscape is impacting the stream. Take that versus some of the other ones in a much more natural system. Natural systems just almost inherently have natural or more wild rivers. And one of the things that we want to try to do through this class is understanding, while the goal isn't to mimic natural systems, it's to understand why natural systems do the things they do, so that in our planning and in our designs, we can incorporate enough of those so that we don't have systems that we're designing that are at conflict with some of the fundamental properties of what streams want to do, how they want to move the water, how they want to move the sediment, how they want to react to changes. So what we have up here is a graphic that's called Lane's balance. It's kind of one of those classic fundamental concepts of geomorphology. How many people have seen this graphic or some other form of it before? Right, we've got maybe half of the hands or something like that. How many people understand this graphic? Most of the same hands, so that's good. This is, I think, a really good graphic because it's a great starting point for considering geomorphology. Really what it's doing is kind of in the context that Ryan was talking about, is we have very dynamic systems with rivers and their corridors. But if you think of sort of over a long period of time, stream systems are going to want to come to some type of a quasi-equilibrium or almost a balance. And what this does is it really shows some of the main components that impact them. So if you're looking on the left-hand side, sort of across the arm of the scale, you have sediment size. So that's one of the components. Then you have a bunch of sediment that's sitting on the scale. So that is your actual sediment load. So sediment size, sediment load on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you have slope, sort of the energy that you're inducing into a system. And then you've got the fishbowl there that's water. It's peak flow rate, it's volume of flow. It's the additional amount of energy that's in the system. And so the idea with Lane's balance is that while streams are dynamic and they're changing, and this is a simplification, you always would want to consider those different four things: the size of sediment, the amount of sediment, stream slope or alignment, and the amount of water in the system. And the idea that I think is really important to take away in urban settings is often in urban settings, we're modifying one or more of these parameters and to understand what the response would be. So as a, for instance, in this graphic, if you look at the fishbowl and you said, here's this natural stream and it's got this amount of water. And then we're going to develop that area. As Ryan talked about, we're developing that area. What would happen to the amount of water in that fishbowl if we're going from a natural to a developed system? Right, it would go up. Exactly, it would go up. So what does going up do to this balance? Which way would that right side of the scale change, up or down? Down, just like, yeah. So what that would do, if you look along in the middle of the scale, you have either degradation or aggradation. That means if you tip the scale that way, you're going to have degradation or essentially erosion. And if you can take nothing more from geomorphology, I'm gonna, in later class, I have another thing that I'll say that's also really important, but to say one of the most important things that I hope you get out of the geomorphology discussions is this natural quasi balance of the stream. And if you have a system that is being disrupted from a natural state by any one of these parameters, there is going to be a response, and understanding and being able to plan for that response is really important.
Can you explain aggregation? Does it mean you have more aggregates?
Good question. Sorry. So really, another term we could use where we have degradation means erosion, aggradation means deposits. So essentially, if you think of a delta in the ocean, sediment is depositing there as water comes in a delta. That is aggradation. It's dropping out of material. So think of it as the opposite of erosion. Erosion taking material away, aggradation is depositing material. So we talked about the things that the stream are influenced by. The real important thing to think about in the projects is what are the responses and what will trigger those responses. So change in energy, maybe you're modifying a stream, it needs to be narrowed down, it needs to be more linear, you're going to have more energy, you're going to move more material. The sediment might change. You might say, well, we need to put in a detention basin at this location. Downstream, we used to have all the sediment that's coming through. We no longer have that. You're changing that part of the sediment load. And with all of that, when you're doing planning or doing design, I think a really important kind of high level thing, we're not trying to teach everyone to be geomorphologists in this class, or I wouldn't have any work to do. But to think about this is, what are those responses? And if you kind of understand those likely responses, you have a pretty good first step in understanding the type of things you may need to consider and want to incorporate in your design. I'm going to say not as important as Lane's balance, but another concept that I think is a good takeaway on geomorphology in natural systems and in developed system is that streams act like a conveyor belt for sediment. And so what that means is in any place on any river, you can put yourself into some part of this conveyor belt. On the far right-hand side of this image, you have the zone of erosion. That's actually where you're having sediment that's coming into the stream. It might be from a hillside, might be from a bank, but there's sediment that's entering into the system. Then you have this zone of transport where things are sort of more in equilibrium. The amount of sediment that's coming in is being moved out. It's kind of that kind of nice balance of equilibrium. And then on the left-hand side is this zone of deposition. That is kind of the aggradation zone, or places where you're having sediment that drop out. And this is true in all stream systems. Skip through these. And it's an important thing to consider because oftentimes when we're looking at streams, we'll look at the amount of sediment that is potentially being moved. We will look at the flows, but we'll kind of forget about the impacts of one zone on another. So you may have a project, back to the example of putting in a detention facility. If you put a detention facility in an area, would you call a detention facility a erosional zone, a transport zone, or a depositional zone? Depositional zone, absolutely. The sediment is dropping out. So the sediment drops out. So what then is right downstream of that? You'd expect to have essentially no sediment in the stream since you're downstream of that. So what zone do you automatically go into?
Hungry water.
Hungry water, exactly. You're in erosional zone. And so it's a good thing to consider where you fit in, what the areas upstream of you are, and with the project that you're doing, what impacts that may have downstream that may have positive or negative unintended consequences. So
just a quick question for the group then, when we relate it back to the hydraulics, if you have a project where you're putting all your water into a storm sewer and then dumping it into the river, what are the possible downstream impacts from a geomorphic perspective?
Start the sediment.
Yep. Depending on your watershed and how much, sediment's getting into that storm sewer, reducing that sediment load. Yep.
Discharge velocity is usually very.
Yep. And then back to the lanes balance, you're adding more water back into the system through those storm sewers.
Changing the slope, which is the energy. And oftentimes, like in that situation, you're tugging on multiple sides of that balance. You're increasing the flow, you're increasing the slope, which is tipping the scale one way. And then maybe from a sediment standpoint, you might even be counterbalancing it. So it's never quite as easy as, oh, I'm going to adjust one thing on a scale, but it really is, it's a great question because it's the real life applications of something like that.
There's a question online that says, can you explain the impact of detention facilities using lanes balance?
Absolutely. So a detention facility. So I didn't realize I had to go back that far. So as we're talking about, a detention facility is going to change the amount of sediments. We talked about that. So the facility itself is going to capture sediment, making a starved reach downstream. It's also going to change the flow that's coming out because detention facilities, they change the timing of flow, but they don't change the volumetrics of flow. So you're going to have less high peak in flow, but you're going to have longer duration flows that come out of a detention facility, which is a great segue to where I was going. Let's see. Is this that I think in typical stream design, we're very used to 100-year flood and modeling that. We probably have looked at the 500-year flood. People look at the 2-year, maybe the 5 and the 10. And those are things that I think are very ingrained into calculations that are done because we have specific infrastructure that's tied to those storm recurrences. In geomorphology and stream health, it really goes a lot beyond that. And in one of our classes, we're going to spend probably more time than you care, but I like doing it, so you have to suffer through it, is to look at all those different flows and how they really impact the stream. But I think the takeaway from today is that all the flows are important. We know on the far right-hand side, the major flood, 100-year event, has a big impact on streams because so much water, so much sediments moving that they're going to adjust the stream. I think we all sort of understand that. The thing is that 100-year storms happen how often? Yeah, exactly. Or roughly once every 100 years, not very, very frequent. Then you come down to base flows and in a perennial stream, you think of the flow that truly is a base flow and is always there. They're always doing a little bit of work. And the amount of work that they're doing on one given day is nothing like the work that a 100-year storm does when it occurs. But how often do base flows occur? 24/7. I mean, it's constant work that's going on. And then the annual flood or sort of those in-between flows, it may be once a year, 3 times a year, once every 5 years, sort of flows in that range. They certainly don't do the work that 100-year event does. They do a lot more work than your base flows do. But from a recurrence, they're happening much less frequently. The point from a geomorphic standpoint is all of these flows impact the streams. In a sand type system, which a lot of projects in the flood district are, which types of flows do you think have the biggest impact on sort of the shape of the channel and the stream corridor? Sorry, I didn't hear that. Base flow. Could be, yeah, it really depends, but much more so than a mountain stream that you have boulders and cobbles and bedrock, that those base flows really aren't doing anything. In sand systems, it could be your minor events. Ryan had the graphic with a 1/4 inch of rain, 1/2 inch of rain, which in undeveloped, they don't produce much runoff. As we develop those areas, those basins, and those types of events are happening pretty frequently. It could be that those are the most important type of rainfall events and flows to your stream system. So the takeaway here that we'll get into is that geomorphology and streams just are impacted by the full range of flows, and you can't limit yourself to just looking at a couple of the different flows. And then the last thing for this class, and we're really going to get into this with sort of the Marcy Gulch example that was talked about, is what happens if you don't consider the changes in urbanization, what they do to streams. So if you have this at the top here, this stage 1 graphic, and what this is representing is this nice quasi-stable stream. You've got a channel, and when it floods, water spills out in floodplain, everything's kind of stable. If you don't factor in the things, in this case, it could be a change in flow or an increase in flow. We've seen this throughout the Front Range. South Platte River is a perfect example. With more water that comes in, the streams are erosive. Thinking back to Lane's Balance, we have more water. We channelized the stream, we made them straighter, the slopes increased, we added more water, they just downcut. They went into this stage 2 incision. As soon as that happens, you have a stream that's disconnected from its floodplain. It starts to fail the banks because you have this incised channel, it widens out. Anyway, I won't go into this in detail now, but the takeaway here is that streams will respond. And if you don't plan for, or first, if you don't understand the impacts that are going to the stream and you don't plan for them, there is going to be a response. And oftentimes in developed corridors where we start to take more and more room away from the stream, the responses that the streams are going to have are not something that are considered favorable to the surrounding community, and certainly are things that are very costly. Any questions on that?
I just wanted to add one thing with the base flows. Talking about the development, Brent, I think you mentioned it earlier, but out on the eastern edge where we're just constantly expanding, really understanding how those base flows are going to change over time. Troy and I actually worked on a project out on the West Fork, which is out by the airport, where it was just in the early stages of development. And so when you're looking at the flows, the 2-year flow for that undisturbed or that natural watershed was less than 10 CFS, for that 2-year flow rate. But then when you look at the full build out condition of that development, now your two-year flow rate is in the hundreds, 200 CFS, which is a very different condition than the natural system. And so how do we design for that kind of change within the stream corridor? I think it's really important to keep in mind.
So I mean, even if you try and modify that to maintain historic releases, your volume and duration of those lower flows orders of magnitude longer and higher and more frequent. So even if you control the peak, your impact of erosion and things like that is substantially higher.
Yep.
Yeah, the comment was that even if you can control the peak, you still have those increased volumes, and that's very true. And it's unfortunate that I think so much of our mindset in stream design is to look at a 2-year event, 5-year event, and 100-year event, and ignore everything else. And as Ryan went through the duration, frequency, and then here talking about the necessity to really consider all those flows is where we want you to go, or at least take that away from the classes.
I have a question. Go back to that real quick. Just to get people moving their arms here. Go back to the cross sections. There you go. What in our urban systems, which of these are we typically trying to get to? Say it out loud. 1 and a 5. Yeah. In our urban systems, what are we almost always responding to in our planning and design. 2 and 3. Or I would take, actually. Personally. Yeah, so I mean, it's just really good to be constantly thinking about where we are, to the point of nature knows how to do this on a really big set, it's like, if we weren't here, this wouldn't matter, right? But we are. And so it's really important to be considering where we are in this order thing here that we're trying to work with. I always refer back to, I love this little series because in our urban systems, especially where we are, where we have a lot of sandy systems, man, we hang out right there a lot.
And any stream you're in that you see that has grade control structures across it and riprap on the sides, they were probably close to 1 before, and then the response was the down cutting, put in grade control, the bank erosion and widening, put in riprap on the side. So those are all responses that, are just natural responses, but hopefully one of the things that we're working towards is being able to understand those responses before the responses, and our designs incorporate more stability into them than just having to say, well, let's put in just grade control and riprap.
There was a comment online that says, is a river ever, quote, stable? Does the term have an inherent time component?
There is a statement that I wish I knew who made it, but you'll never step into the same river twice because it's always moving. I mean, your water is always doing work, sediment is always moving. So essentially not, certainly there are some bedrock and boulder type of streams that don't change very often. They do take the 2013 type flows to really alter the stream corridor. So there are some, but most of what we work in and even recreate in are things that are always changing. And the changes could be almost inconceivable, where a few things move, boulders move, a tree falls in, it causes more deposition in some area. They're always evolving, or it could be a sand bed system that after a half an inch of rain really changes. So it's sort of that kind of continuum. But yeah, change is the only certainty.
I like the idea of time scale, when we're talking about one individual's lifespan, a generation, whatever, and then you think geologic time, right? Those kinds of things are really important in terms of what we're trying to battle. Good question.
Ran into your time, Mary.
That's okay. What do I have?
Yeah, facility your moment. We're fine, we did some rearranging, so go ahead and take your 15, 20 that you.
Okay. All right. Sounds good.
But also,
Keep moving.
also it takes.
Well, you guys are gonna have to give me the sign because I tend to blab.
I will.
Yeah. I'm a blabber. But it's always good blabbage.
Habits.
That's good.
Mary
Um,
comes up with the best phrases and words, always.
I will say to that point about the stability, right? Again, I think it has to do with your time frame, because I would say in ecological sciences, you have the dynamic equilibrium, right? To Troy's point, the stream is never the same, but generally speaking, it can operate within rather predictable limits, right? So it's stable. It's always changing, but it's kind of within a certain bandwidth, if you will, right? So you have some predictability and stability about what it's doing as it's being a dynamic system. Where we come in is suddenly we'll push the lever, we'll increase the water, we'll do something to mess that up. So suddenly the river is behaving outside of its sort of normal parameters. And that's where the instability is sort of what we see is when it all of a sudden sticking its elbows out in ways it didn't used to. So I think the idea of stability, I think if you keep your mind open a little bit more about what that means from a natural system, it's helpful. We've all seen river valleys, nice flat ones where you have a really skinny, nice meandering stream, right? that thing doesn't stay there. We know it travels from, maybe valley bottom all the way across. You can see those old relics. That's a really stable system, even though the stream is moving constantly. So, as I like to say, it's a good consultant's answer. It depends, on what you're thinking about, so. Anyway, and vegetation in my mind really fits into that conversation nicely. Because vegetation, when we're talking about it in our natural systems, excuse me, it can influence that variability and that stability in what's possible, right? It can, depending on what's there, it can affect what those guardrails are that the system is operating within, if you're talking about your water and the geomorphology. So we're going to start real broad, and that is just generally ecology. What is it? Well, it's the study of how organisms interact with one another and with their physical environment. Okay. Ecology, the word, the etymology of that is ecos. It's Greek ecos for house, and ology is the study. So it's a study of our house. It's a study of our home. It's, it kind of, I like the fact that it includes people because we have homes. It's not exclusive to some sort of like art, I hate to say it, but we are natural. We are a product of our environment, and this is what the planet has decided to generate. And here we are. But for our purposes, we're going to sort of set ourselves separate because we do influence things more than the average bear as far as effects on our home. So I want to point out two aspects here. One is that it's organisms and physical environment. Things to hang on in your head. So I like this. What's the difference in ecosystem? An ecosystem consists of those organisms and their environment. So the ecosystem is out there. Use ecology to study ecosystem, right? So the ecosystem is a thing. Ecology is an avenue of study. So I do like to make sure, I don't know, that old ecologist, darn him, he talked about putting stuff in the ecology early on, everything's connected and you can't, I don't know what the quote was, but I was like, oh, I really prefer him to say ecosystem. But anywho, so I like to use ecosystem. I won't talk about ecology much unless I'm talking about the course of study. But again, organisms and the physical environment. It's those two aspects that work together. And that goes back to the question before about soil and vegetation. Vegetation, the organism interacting with its environment, the soil. So absolutely cannot separate them. So anyway, this is just kind of a teasing out the difference between ecology and ecosystem. So again, organisms and their environment, or their physical environment. The sciencey way to say it, the big word way is biotic versus abiotic. Biotic being biological factors, abiotic, without biology, living systems. So give some thought to what we encounter in our systems, the biotic and the abiotic factors that we run into in our projects and day to day. It doesn't have to just be projects. Let me see if I did my slide properly. Okay, good. Let's start with biotic, and you can throw some stuff in the chat. You guys can say some things. What are some biotic examples of biotic factors? Organisms. What are some examples? And this isn't a trick question. I'll start. Wait, sorry. Plants. Absolutely. What else is biotic? Beaver. Okay. Yep. They're very biotic. Animals. Mammals. That's a mammal. What else?
Christy Lee online says microbes and fungi.
Oh, geez. Christy Lee. Oh, Christy Lee, the ecologist. Microbes and fungi. Yes. Absolutely. What else? Nutrients? I'd say those might be a little more on the chemically side. I mean, they can have organic compounds or come from organic biotic factors, but they might no longer have that living piece to it. I'm thinking like living organisms.
Birds?
Birds, you betcha. Mycorrhizae, and that's part of the fungus piece, absolutely. Just a couple more. Think pond scum,
Line, we have Lee Majors.
B majors. Biotic, not bionic, but that's a pretty good one. He's right in the middle. Lee would, the bionic man would be right in the middle there.
Algae.
Algae, yes. And cyanobacteria, yes. Some people would say a virus, we don't know for sure, but yeah. So you can go from the big down to the little dinky. And I will tell you, when we start talking about the topsoil and so forth, those small things, the fungi, the bacteria, the small arthropods, nobody said insects. Insects make up most of the biomass on this planet. A lot of insects and arthropods and so forth. So it's those little guys that really affect things that we don't even think about, but they're so important. So yes, we got all those. Boom, plants, animals, protists, fungi, bacteria. These are the, I can't even say it. Those are like the bacteria and whatnot. Viruses and things. What about abiotic factors? Let's clip through it pretty quick. Abiotic, pardon? Sand, minerals, rocks, sure. What else? Water. What else? Pardon?
Chemicals and nutrients.
Chemicals, nutrients. What else? Sunlight, yeah. Temperature, sunlight, pardon? Climate, weather, moisture. What else? I'm thinking of something. What about pH? That's kind of chemically, but pH. Great. What did we miss? Humidity, soil, salinity. Ooh, salinity in our soils is so important. Light, temperature, air. One thing that's missing, it kind of comes in with some of this, but the physical expression is topography would be for us, a really important consideration in the interaction of our plants and our sites. So we'll move on. Another thing that we kind of think about when we're talking about ecology, the study of ecosystems, is different scale, right? Ecos, our house. So we start, kind of hard to see in person, but we start up at the global scale of ecology, and you could just start zooming down from the global scale into more of a landscape or continental scale. You know, the difference between sub-Saharan Africa versus equatorial Africa. Then you can zoom in farther, so you're looking at actual communities. The difference between maybe a tropical rainforest and, I don't know, a tropical savanna can be different, right? And you keep zooming in until you're finally down to these little ecosystems that are so complicated and so small. And that's down into the topsoil layer where there's so much happening down there all the time. Those busy little insects and fungi down there. And this is really a huge driver that we'll try to get some insight into as we move forward. But so when you're talking about your systems, we really are looking at the landscape scale with our projects. We're in the South Platte River Valley. That's landscape scale. We're in a particular project reach, right? But then we're also looking at the microtopography that we're creating with our grading plans. Excuse me. And then we're also looking at what we're trying to do with the soil. Is it riprap? Is it grounded boulders? Is it, void filled riprap with a topsoil layer? That kind of thing. So we have to be thinking about the scale throughout when we're looking at our natural systems and how we're changing them with our projects. One thing too, again, this goes back to the interaction of the organic or the abiotic and the biotic and abiotic factors that we look at. Is these patterns that we see on the landscape. And maybe it's just because I'm a biologist, or maybe I became a biologist because I thought it was fascinating, but I love looking at a landscape and trying to figure out why. What is it that is driving what I'm seeing? Right? Why do I have a little patch of shrubs versus a bunch of grasses versus whatever, trees? Why do we not have pinyon pine out on our plains here? Or even like any kind of conifers out here, but you just go down to Parker and there's the pinery. What the heck? Right? Why? There's reasons. There's reasons. And so to me, I'm just always fascinated by trying to discern what those reasons are. I love flying in an airplane and you're looking down, it's like, oh, what's going on there? You can see a lot of it because you can see more of the bones of the landscape when you're flying. So this is an example. This is like going up I-70 and you look off, in the foothills, either direction. What are you seeing? What are some of the patterns you're seeing here? And you don't have to, we're almost lunch, so I'll help you out a little bit. But obviously, you have conifer trees on certain slopes, certain sides, you have more open areas. The colors, and here's some aspen going up into here. All these things are there for reasons, right? What are some of the influences? Just real quick. Let's see what we can figure out real quick. It's valleys, topography, pardon? Aspect, which direction is getting hit by the sun? Aspect has to do with your north-facing, south-facing slopes, right? This is probably an east or a south-facing slope, whereas this over here is probably cooler, doesn't get as much solar radiation. What else is affecting? Pardon?
Elevation.
Elevation, absolutely, can have a big effect, for sure. We're not seeing too much topographic relief here, but at some point, everybody's going to drop out, right? What else are we seeing?
Online, soil moisture, sun exposure, wind, slope.
Slope. Yeah, we already got that a little bit, but yeah, that one hit on it. The soil moisture, right? We know that conifers like more moisture than grasses. And so it's the sunlight, it's the moisture, and it's the geology piece. Outcrops of rocks, maybe there's more soil, better developed soils in low spots. So all these things are working together. Plants are really good at finding places they want to be. So our job as ecologists and landscape architects and others is to try to figure out why they're there. Another piece that's really important with our project planning and thinking about things from an ecological perspective is this really old and somewhat outdated idea of plant succession, or how plants come into and invade a space. This is over time, hundreds of years, I'd say thousands of years, you could even have, where everything's left alone. We start, let's just say you start out as a bare rock. Jesse, 5 minutes. Okay. And then over time, you'll end up, the plants come in, they grow, they kind of find their space, right? Conditions change over time, soils develop, things happen, and you end up with sort of a happy place, right? Does this little place, the climax community implies that it's here forever? Based on what we've talked about earlier, is that true? Do you think everything just stays the same forever? Nope. Nope, because we have disturbance that happens, right? We constantly have this reset event that can happen. And when I'm looking at a landscape, I'm thinking about, there's a whole field of study of disturbance ecology. What is resetting us? How far back do we go? What are some examples of disturbance in our metro area that we have taken away for the most part? Disturbance that really affects the landscape. Fire, absolutely. You see it up in the mountains, but not down here. What else? Flooding, yeah, we've actually done a pretty good job. No flooding. There's one other thing that's a big factor that we don't have anymore either. It's not very commonly thought of.
Online, there's animal access, grazing.
Herbivory, yes. We'll stop it there.
Yeah.
Herbivory. We don't have grazers out there resetting or suppressing our trees and stuff, right? So what happens if we go in and we do a project and we say, whoop, we're done. We've planted our trees and planted our shrubs. And over time, what happens? Overgrowth, because we don't have the reset. We have so much deferred maintenance on our vegetation management because we have no disturbance here. It just keeps going and it gets old and unhealthy. I'll beat that drum a lot more as we go on. So we already talked about some of that interplay. Yeah. So that's my 5-minute spiel. I'll get more, I'll get my makeup time, right?
You will, but I want to make sure, we need to move along, but also any questions bubbling up that we have to answer today, right now, about vegetation?
It got short shrift because it is the most important element. I just want to put that out. So,
We'll all be around for lunch as well, so if you have additional questions for Mary,
Yeah.
please feel free. Thank you.
sure.
We had an exercise plan. Takes way longer than 5 minutes. So we're gonna do a different thing. We're gonna, what we're gonna have you do here in the room is pair up. So if you don't have find your stream management buddy. If you don't have a buddy, that's you. If you don't have a buddy too, maybe you can come up to the front. You guys can pair up. We're gonna kind of just review the day, briskly. And not to like look at you, but we're gonna review the day briskly. Online folks, feel free to pop your answers in the chat. We're gonna talk about what happened today, do a quick review, and then a very brief looking forward preview into the next 2 classes. Here we are. And I'll just stay up here for fun.
Pay no attention to that.
I'm waiting for that.
Is that right? Not yet. Jesse's gonna ask you some questions.
Yeah, that's what I was just asking. Are they in here? I don't know which one's first.
What's your question?
The survey things.
What, she can pop that up when you get to the Transect part.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good.
Yeah, so let's ask the first question first about,
As you can tell, this is super organized.
Yeah.
Part of it. Yeah. So I think all we were going to do was go through sort of what today was. Today was attempting to be focused mostly on natural systems and the idea that we're really referring to natural processes, those kinds of things. And so my first question was, as I wrote it down, I know. Did you make a most important function or benefit? No. Okay, perfect. Hands up or just blurt them out. What is the most important function that you came away from the discussion of natural systems? What's the most important function that you feel is relevant today?
Geomorphology.
Vegetation.
okay, how about we do,
Are we talking about 5 elements or what
No,
kind of
important
function?
function of the natural systems. Just function of natural systems. Sustainability, that's function. We talked to Troy. Troll was mentioned, sustainability. Systematically working, wow.
Adaptation to change is what Teresa said.
Adaptation to
on-
change, okay. What's the most important benefit that we have function? Benefit,
Interesting.
de-stressification. Multiple.
Stability.
Stability. You guys are really taking the technical approach. Okay.
Balance was said online.
Balance.
Yes.
Values.
Values?
Say it again. Values. Okay. Safety. Benefits, right? So natural systems. Think big about natural systems, because when we move into the next session, we're going to really shift to the right side of the transect, which is our next just wrap up task here. So what did we put it? Oh, yeah. Live in first.
Yep.
Live in first. Okay. So Laura, how about Laura? She whipped this up. Thank you for doing that. Awesome. which zone of the urban transect do you all live in? And I'm gonna go raise a hands on this one, and online you can respond, or you're welcome to respond if you want. Who lives in T1? Anybody has lived in T1? There you go. How about T2? Has lived in T2? T3? Has lived in T3 anymore? Yep. How about T4? T5ers, 6? Anybody in a high rise? Cool. That's cool. This is, Laura, that's awesome. Good work. Wow. That's super cool. How about work? Now let's talk about work. Anybody work in T1 realm? Every now and again? Yep. T2? You? T3? There should be some hands starting to raise up. T4? T5? Yeah, a lot of T5. Wait, let me see the T5s again. And 6, anybody working really ultra urban? Yep, okay. That's really fun. So this is super typical. And when we talk urbanization, the next time, you're gonna see that a lot of, similar to the maybe what your expectations were for geomorphology, we start to see that a lot of the work to be done is in that kind of 3, 4, 5. By the time you get to 6, you're really limited. When you're over in 2, you've got a lot of space. So this is super cool. Thank you for that. Laura, nice work. Okay, then we went 5 elements, right? And I just want to, this is going to be super quick. Hopefully there's just some things that popped up. What was the most memorable concept that came up from the H&H discussion? I'm going to mash the 2 H's together for these purposes. Hydrology and hydraulics. Memorable concept that you learned, that's something you didn't know, or something most impactful. And maybe this is coming from people who are not civil engineers who are living in H&H all day.
I always thought the definition of hydraulics had the word pipe in it, but it doesn't.
Oh.
Like,
So for
now I'm more confused.
great. So the comment was, I always thought the definition of hydraulics had the word pipe in it. Any other H&H ahas?
Let's go to
Anything online?
Nope.
All right.
Okay, good. Vegetation.
Key takeaway from veg.
Key takeaway?
Same slope in that photo, so it really
Yep.
depicts.
One of the things I really love, just because we're not getting a whole lot of feedback on this one, we are the one that Mary has that kind of goes left to right that shows progression. We're always aiming for this, like, what's the term? Climax condition, right? We're like every project, people are thinking about these killer forests wherever you are, whether it's ultra urban or not. And I think, thinking about that progression, disturbance, etc. That one's really cool to me. Geomorph.
Streams for changing hydrology that have different geomorphic context within the same project.
Cool. I cannot read.
Hopefully everyone online heard that, because that was great.
Nobody's saying Lane's balance. Come on. That is,
Okay.
yeah.
Balance.
Lane's balance should be something that if you don't get it, or if you haven't seen it, pull it up. It's really awesome. I love Lane's balance, and I thought that those words would never be uttered by me, but I really love Lane's balance. Okay, and then last, community values. Essential. People matter. No, good. So next time, we're gonna get into sort of urbanization. Why urbanization? What does it mean? How does it reflect some of the things that we're talking about, et cetera?
Yep.
And
And we're gonna, so we're gonna talk about urbanization. Brent, can you give us a 20-second, 30-second preview for the third class?
The third class, we're gonna talk more about planning and how that can influence a lot of what we're talking about with urban streams. And what we can do at the beginning of, before we even add urbanization, what we can do as a group to alleviate some of the issues that we
Things you
a
can do at
bunch
the
of so what?
Yeah,
have. And, yeah.
yeah, and what things we can do at the start so that we're not scrambling at the end to include some of those people or concepts or elements in our system
Mhm.
before we get to the end. So thank you.
Yes, I thought you might want to hear this. Community values is what determines true success
Oh,
online.
man, whoever that is.
That is great. And 12:04,
Clearly the most important.
we have a wrestling match about like which element is the best. So just,
We've reestablished that.
yeah.
At the beginning.
So thank you everyone for
Thank you
joining
all.
today.